Chapter 504. Go to Watch Network. Xinyan shouted at Li Yundong with a face full of anger, ****. How dare you say that the Buddhist incantation of 9 words created by our Grandmaster, Master Hongfa, came from your Taoist school? How ridiculous and shameless. Tachibana Wakako also rebuked angrily, how dare you? This is a rude offense to our Mount Koya. You must pay the price. Li Yundong scoffed at their accusations and anger. He cupped his hands and said to the crowd, everyone, I wonder if anyone has read Guhong's book Biyao. The cultivators of the various sects laughed. Some of them were angry and laughed at Li Yundong. Jinrenli, you look down on us too much. Biyao is an introductory book for cultivation, only below the inner canon of the Yellow Emperor. Since we are cultivators, how could we not have read it? Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, since everyone has read it, I believe everyone knows that there is a saying in Biyao, inner part, etc., that it is appropriate to know the secret of Liujia before entering the mountain. Zhu said, Lin Bing and Do, all go forward in formation. Often when the secret blessing is given, there is nothing that cannot be avoided. I wonder if you have any impression of this sentence? Immediately, a cultivator said curiously, there is indeed such a sentence, but Jinrenli, what does this sentence have to do with brother-in-law Jin Yuan? Li Yundong said with a smile, Master Hongfa of Japan brought back many classic works from our mainland of China. When he was studying in China, he was also deeply influenced by Taoism, so he once copied the inner part of Guhong's Biyao. But who would have thought that he would be dazzled and actually copy the sentence Lin Bing and Do, all go forward in formation, into Lin Bing and Do, all go forward in formation. So when he went back, he accidentally created the so-called Buddhist incantation of 9 words of Dongmi. It's really a coincidence. Li Yundong's words made everyone laugh out loud, and some cultivators even fell down laughing. Go to the network. They all knew what Guhong had said, but none of them had expected that Li Yundong would say that this sentence was the source of the Buddhist incantation of 9 words of Dongmi. Zhang Ling looked at Li Yundong, amused and annoyed at the same time. She shook her head and said, young people are really fearless. They dare to say anything. Ridiculous, really ridiculous. Li Yundong's words caused everyone to burst into laughter, but Xinyan, Tachibana Wakako, and the others were so angry that their bodies trembled. Xinyan saw that Li Yundong's words were really unconstrained and boundless. He had actually described the founder of Xinyan Tantrism, Master Hongfa, as a cultivator with blurred eyes and crooked hands. The most terrible thing was that he had even quoted scriptures and had eyes and nose. No one would not believe him. Xinyan said angrily, you Chinese cultivators should watch your words. Some things can't be said carelessly. You said that the Buddhist incantation of 9 words was copied wrongly by Master Hongfa. Do you have any evidence to prove this? Li Yundong smiled and asked, no. However, do you have any evidence to prove that Master Hongfa didn't copy wrongly at that time? When Li Yundong said that the Buddhist incantation of 9 words came from the book Biyao, some old and prudent cultivators shook their heads secretly, feeling that it was a little inappropriate. However, when Li Yundong said these words, even the most profound people couldn't help shaking their heads and laughing, and some other young cultivators even laughed wildly. Ruan Hongling, who was sitting not far away, laughed out loud. She took Zi Yuan's arm and whispered, Zi Yuan Shiji, Li Yundong is making trouble again. I thought that when his cultivation was higher, he would be more like a great cultivator. I didn't expect that a leopard can't change its spots. Last time on Mount Tianlong, he asked the cultivators present to hand over the evidence of Ao Wushuang and Renyuan Jindan. I almost died of laughter. I didn't expect that this time, he would do such a shameless thing without any evidence. Zi Yuan also broke into a smile and said with a smile, this is the nature of a great cultivator. Freedom is the true way. Not sticking to one pattern is the way of immortality. Ruan Hongling laughed in a low voice and said, is this kind of shameless way of immortality? Zi Yuan Shiji, I think you have him in your heart. Naturally, everything he says is the true way, and everything he does is the way of immortality, he. Zi Yuan suddenly glared at Wan Hongling with shame and anger and scolded in a low voice, "Shut up. Is this the place to say such things?" Wan Hongling made a face at her and said, "Well, I'll go back and talk about it." Zi Yuan was so angry that her neck turned red. She turned her head away and stopped looking at Wan Hongling. But when she looked at Li Yundong, her usually calm and indifferent eyes could no longer calm down. When Xinyan heard Li Yundong's words, even though his cultivation was deep and he was very calm, he couldn't help but be so angry that his nose was almost crooked. He suddenly became furious and flicked his sleeves, saying, "You only know how to take advantage of an ignorant child. Damn it." Tachibana Wakako's eyebrows were raised, and her eyes were full of murderous intent as she shouted at Li Yundong, "How dare you speak so carelessly?" Li Yundong sneered without showing any weakness and said, "Then how dare you say that there are no masters in the Chinese continent?" Tachibana Wakako laughed angrily and said, "Ha, the cultivators in the Chinese continent who call themselves masters are vulnerable. Even Zi Yuan, who is known as the number one, is no match for me. How dare you call yourself a master like this?" Li Yundong snorted and said, "The divine land of China is thousands of miles away, and there are many hidden dragons and crouching tigers. I don't know how many masters are cultivating in seclusion. How dare you be so arrogant after defeating a few young people? You are really arrogant and ignorant. If our Chinese cultivation sects really send out masters, they can crush you with one finger." When the cultivators of the various sects saw that Li Yundong did not care about the past and helped them to smooth things over, they were both impressed and grateful. They couldn't help but cheer loudly, "Jinrenli, well said." Tachibana Wakako sneered and said, "Does defeating you prove that there are no masters in the Chinese continent?" Li Yundong sneered and said, "Even if you defeat me, it doesn't prove anything. Because there are so many talents and heroes in the Chinese continent. I believe that there must be many hidden masters who are much stronger than me. How can I dare to claim to be the best? Besides, with your kung fu, you can't defeat me, let alone those great cultivators who stand aloof from the world." Tachibana Wakako was furious. She snorted and said angrily, "Well, I want to see how you are better than me." After that, she opened the gold and silver fan in her hand and threw it in front of her. The countless ghosts drawn on the fan began to move along with the black mist flowing on the fan, as if the fan was a gate leading to the underworld, and the black mist seemed to be guiding these demons and ghosts. These demons and ghosts followed the black mist and walked down the fan one by one. For a time, hundreds of ghosts surged out, and the downstairs was full of gloomy qi. The roars of ghosts and the wails of ghosts were everywhere, which made people's hair stand on end. When the cultivators saw that Li Yundong had the upper hand in the argument, on the one hand, they felt extremely relieved, but on the other hand, they were a little worried. Li Yundong's fighting strength was indeed strong, but Tachibana Wakako had the power of a god. No matter how powerful Li Yundong was, how could he be an enemy of a god? When Zhongling, Du Fei, and the other experienced and prudent cultivators saw that Tachibana Wakako was continuously releasing demons and ghosts, they all said to Li Yundong loudly, "Jinrenli, hit her in the middle. Don't let her release all these ghosts." Zi Yuan couldn't help shouting, "Li Yundong, don't be careless." However, Li Yundong seemed to turn a deaf ear to her. He squinted at Tachibana Wakako, as if he was waiting for her to use all her strength so that she would be convinced of her defeat. Seeing that Li Yundong was so arrogant, Tachibana Wakako became even angrier. The sound of her chanting seemed to make everything around her tremble. As Tachibana Wakako recited the spell, not only did the war soul undead she had summoned become more and more ferocious and terrifying, but even the demons and ghosts walking down from the fan became bloodshot. They stared at Li Yundong in unison, as if they were a group of devils who would choose people to devour at any time. Everyone saw that there were so many demons and ghosts standing on the field. Not to mention fighting, they could crush people to death if they rushed up. Those who were timid would have been scared to the point of peeing their pants. How could they have the strength to resist? With a loud shout, Tachibana Wakako waved the flag in her hand, pointed at Li Yundong, and shouted, "Die." In an instant, all kinds of demons and ghosts roared and pounced on Li Yundong. Although the people on the sidelines knew that these ghosts were not pouncing on them, they still couldn't help but turn blue with fear and take a few steps back. Some arrogant cultivators couldn't help but think, so many demons and ghosts are pouncing on me. If it were me, how would I resist them? Li Yundong sneered. He quickly pinched his fingers, and his 5 fingers turned into a few residual shadows. He quickly pushed his palm forward and made 3 Mahamudra in a row. These 3 Mahamudra were the Mahamudra of Vairocana, the Samaya Mahamudra of the Vajra realm, and the immovable fundamental seal. Li Yundong blasted out these 3 Mahamudra, but they only slapped in front of him. Golden light shot out from his hand, and the Mahamudra stopped in the air, as if it was frozen and suspended. The golden light emitted a dazzling light, like a golden wall of light. As soon as the ghosts summoned by Tachibana Wakako touched these powerful Mahamudra, they immediately wailed and turned into a puff of green smoke. It was as if snow had met the scorching sun and melted at the first touch. Tachibana Wakako was shocked. She said in shock, "Impossible. How can you break my night walk of 100 ghosts?" Li Yundong laughed loudly and said, "I have the 7 treasures of Buddha Dharma, and I also have the Taoist cosmic divine power. The righteousness of heaven and earth gathers in my heart, and the divine power of Buddha Dharma is hidden in the Lingtai. How can I be afraid of a little demon like you? Not to mention 100 ghosts, even if thousands of ghosts come at me together, I will still be like a cool breeze blowing on a hill, unmoving." A terrifying light burst out of Tachibana Wakako's eyes. She said sternly, "How dare you? How dare you be so arrogant?" After that, her long black hair suddenly rushed up, and she waved the flag in her hand again. This time, what appeared in front of her were shining golden Vajra arhats. These Vajra arhats were in different postures. Some were holding Vajra scepters, and some were holding demon-subduing sticks. All of them were powerful and looked at Li Yundong with a murderous look. Su Chan, who was looking at the field worriedly, couldn't help but be shocked. What is this? How can she summon ghosts, and Arhat Vajra? Zi Yuan frowned. She took a deep breath and said, "The power of the Tachibana family is divided into 3 kinds. One is to summon the souls of the dead and ghosts to fight for them. The other is more superior, which is to summon the Vajra Arhat worshipped in Ligoino to fight for them. The best is to directly summon the gods to take over and personally participate in the battle." Su Chan asked worriedly, "Can Yundong win?" Zi Yuan had always been very confident in Li Yundong, but at this time, she couldn't help but be a little shaken. She said nervously, "I don't know. If it were the old Li Yundong, he would have no chance of winning at all. But after he came out of the spirit space, I don't know how strong he has become. So, I don't know either." Su Chan, Zhou Qin, Zi Yuan, and the others all clenched their fists and looked at the field. They were extremely worried, and the cultivators of all the sects present also looked frightened. They saw that these Arhats and Vajras were all chanting scriptures, as if the small building had suddenly turned into a Buddhist land. The weapons in their hands were shining, and their bodies were full of pure and majestic Buddhist power. This was the power formed by the powerful spiritual power of the eminent monks of all generations who had been worshipped in Ligoino for 1,200 years. Wei Qing of the Chuanjin Dragon sect looked at the field with her eyes wide open. She said, "It's already very exaggerated that Li Yundong can resist 100 ghosts. But there are so many Vajra Arhats in front of him. How can he resist them?" Yusheng also took a deep breath and said, "As long as he is righteous and has a strong will, it's understandable that he won't be harmed by the Yin Qi with a mouthful of primordial Qi in his mouth. But this is the Vajra of Buddhism, the Shintong Arhat. How can he fight against such pure Buddhist power?" Du Fei looked at the field in shock and murmured, "This seems to be the Vajra exorcism formation of Buddhism. How could this Japanese use such a powerful magic? Is the Chinese cultivation world going to be humiliated like this today?" 8. Yeah. Chapter 505. Go to Watch Network. Li Yunyang saw the majesty of the Vajra demon subduing formation and the bursts of golden light, but his expression did not change. He smiled slightly, put his palms together, and then flipped his fingers like a blooming lotus. A small vermilion ball of light was rolling in his palm, rolling between his palms. Go to Kanban. 7 K.O.M. Li Yundong didn't seem to feel the astonishing pressure of the opponent's Vajra demon subduing formation. He smiled and said, "Give up. Your demon subduing formation can subdue others, but it can't subdue me." Tachibana Wakako smiled coldly. How could she believe it? With a wave of the flag in her hand, a Vajra immediately pounced on Li Yundong aggressively. This Vajra was covered in golden armor and held 2 Vajra pestles in his hands. He was about 2 meters tall. As soon as he moved, he was like a jade pillar that could push a golden mountain, rumbling and pressing down. The Vajra glared angrily, and his face was fierce. He waved the Vajra pestle in his hand and smashed it toward Li Yundong. His strength was fierce, and his momentum was so fierce that the cultivators present felt fear in their hearts when they saw him from afar. They didn't dare to fight with him. However, Li Yundong didn't dodge. He formed a palm with one hand and pushed it forward, as if he wanted to resist the attack of the Vajra pestle with his bare hands. When the cultivators present saw this, they were all shocked. They shouted, "Jinrenli, be careful." When Xinyan and Shinsu saw this, they were both overjoyed. Tachibana Wakako even laughed out loud. The Vajra pestle of the treasure division is invincible. It specializes in breaking all the defenses in the world. Are you courting death? But as soon as she finished speaking, she saw that the Vajra pestle in the Vajra's hand was less than an inch away from Li Yundong's palm, and then it stopped abruptly. Everyone saw that no matter how much the Vajra roared, the Vajra pestle seemed to have encountered an invisible wall and could not break through. Xinyan and Shinsu were shocked at the same time. Shinsu exclaimed, "That's impossible. What kind of cultivation method is this person using? How could it possibly block the Vajra pestle of the Wisdom Vajra?" Xinyan was also shocked. No way. Who is he? How could it possibly withstand the powerful attack of our Mount Guardian deity? When Tachibana Wakako saw that Li Yundong had blocked the blows so easily, she was stunned, but soon became angry out of shame. She directed the surrounding Vajra arhats to pounce on Li Yundong like a tide. Everyone saw that some of these Vajras were slashing fiercely with sabers, some were smashing wildly with Vajra wheels, some were slapping toward Li Yundong one after another, and some were chanting incantations, releasing spells of the 5 elements one after another toward Li Yundong. This storm-like attack almost engulfed Li Yundong's figure. It was as if a terrifying tsunami had appeared out of thin air upstairs, wave after wave, as if it would never stop until the enemy was destroyed. Li Yundong was in the middle of the stormy waves. His expression did not change, and there was a faint smile on the corner of his mouth. He always had one hand in front of him, the palm facing up, dragging the rolling red bead in his palm. The other hand was standing like a palm, constantly moving like a wall to block the attacks from all directions. Everyone saw that Li Yundong's movements were extremely fast. He kept blocking with one hand, but he was able to block the attacks from all directions, as if he had countless arms all over his body. Wherever Li Yundong's vertical palm moved, the fierce Vajra arhats could not attack. It was as if his palm was a natural chasm that they could not cross. Tachibana Wakako saw so many Vajra arhats surrounding Li Yundong and attacking fiercely, but Li Yundong's figure did not move at all. He stood as steady as a mountain, as if he had not used his full strength at all. Tachibana Wakako was shocked and angry. She shouted and slammed the flag in her hand on the floor. In an instant, all the talisman flags on the flag stood up. The surrounding Vajra arhats twisted their bodies in an instant, turning from big to small, turning into small balls of light one after another, quickly flying toward Tachibana Wakako. Very quickly, these balls of light gathered together and suddenly turned into a giant Buddha that was about 2.5 meters tall. The crowd saw that the great Buddha was wearing a white kasaya and a golden crown. He had 1 head and 4 arms, and he was riding a golden peacock. Behind him was the peacock's tail, which was colorful like a magnificent pagoda. Those who knew him cried out in horror, "This is Mahamayuri." Ziyuan also widened her eyes and said in shock, "This is Mahamayuri worshipped by the Kongabuji temple of Mount Koya. Oh my god, this Tachibana Wakako can summon such a powerful god? This is too exaggerated, isn't it?" Everyone saw that Mahamayuri had a benevolent and peaceful face. His hands were in the emblematic gesture of Bisajayaguru Tathagata. He looked solemn, and there was not a trace of evil aura all over his body. At first glance, people felt a sense of worship. How could they dare to have any hostility? At this time, all the cultivators present thought with great fear, is it really the end of our Chinese cultivation world? This little Japanese girl can summon Mahamayuri? She was just a little witch, but what about the goddesses above her? What can she summon? At this time, Shinsu, who was on the sidelines, had already knelt down with a thud. His face was full of excitement, and his eyes were fanatical as he worshipped Mahamayuri. Xinyan, who was beside him, was also trembling with excitement. He put his palms together and chanted the name of Buddha in a low voice. He said, "Amitabha, Tachibana Wakako is actually comprehending the mystery at this time and stimulating all the potential of her bloodline. God bless Mount Koya, and God bless our Jinyin Tantrism." At this time, Tachibana Wakako was like a god looking down at the small common people. She shouted coldly, in front of the true god, "Kneel down." Tachibana Wakako's voice was buzzing, as if countless eminent monks were chanting Buddhist scriptures at the same time, shaking the surrounding air and making visible ripples. Li Yundong remained motionless. He smiled slightly and said, "What is a true god? What is a false god?" Tachibana Wakako was furious. She sneered and said, "You won't repent." She pointed her finger, and Mahamayuri suddenly appeared in front of Li Yundong. With a flip of his palms, he slapped down on the top of Li Yundong's head. Everyone saw that as soon as Mahamayuri's palm turned over, it was as if Buddha had turned over his palm. The sky seemed to be about to collapse. Some people even subconsciously shrank their necks, for fear that the palm would hit their heads. Li Yundong watched helplessly as the sky-flipping palm came toward his head. He still didn't dodge. He smiled slightly and raised his palm. Boom! Everyone felt that the sky and earth were shaking. The palm of Mahamayuri stopped an inch in front of Li Yundong's palm again, as if it had been blocked by the invisible chi wall in front of Li Yundong, unable to move forward at all. Li Yundong smiled and looked at Mahamayuri, who had amazing Buddhist power and was tall and mighty. He smiled lightly, as if what he had blocked was not a terrible god in the world, but a child playing around. At this time, everyone suddenly widened their eyes and looked at Li Yundong in disbelief. They could understand that Li Yundong had used his powerful Jinqi to protect the spiritual platform and prevent the Yin Qi of 100 ghosts from approaching him. They could also understand that Li Yundong had used his amazing fighting strength to block the fierce attack of the Vajra Arhat. However, they couldn't understand why Li Yundong could block such an amazing Mahamayuri so easily. Mahamayuri was one of the famous wisdom kings. He represented the power of Buddha. How could Li Yundong be able to block it? This was too terrifying, wasn't it? Tachibana Wakako was also shocked by Li Yundong's ghost-like performance. She said in horror, "This is impossible. Who the hell are you?" Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "I'm Li Yundong, just a nobody in the Chinese cultivation world." Tachibana Wakako said angrily, "Be ****. She gritted her teeth and let out a sharp roar. The Mahamayuri in front of Li Yundong instantly turned into a colorful stream of light and poured into her body. In an instant, Tachibana Wakako's figure suddenly floated up. Her clothes fluttered without any wind, and her eyes emitted a dazzling white light. The surrounding air was constantly twisting and rubbing, constantly making crackling electric currents and explosions. Everyone was shocked. They knew that Tachibana Wakako was going to risk her life. Zi Yuan also clenched her fists and gritted her teeth. This is the highest summoning skill of a witch. Both Su Chan and Zhou Qin subconsciously widened their eyes. They clenched their fists so hard that their fingernails dug deep into their flesh, but they couldn't feel any pain. At first, when Xinyan and Xinxiu saw that Li Yundong had blocked Mahamayuri's earth-shattering blow, they immediately shouted in horror, "Impossible, this is absolutely impossible." But soon, they saw that Tachibana Wakako had actually invited the power of Mahamayuri to herself, realizing the highest realm of a witch summoning a god. They were all ecstatic and laughed out loud. Xinyan laughed wildly and said, "It's God's will, it's really God's will." At this time, Tachibana Wakako was possessed by Mahamayuri. As soon as she opened her mouth, her voice was a mixture of male and female voices, as if the voice of Buddha was coming from the distant horizon. "In front of the true God, why don't you kneel down?" After that, she moved and waved her hands. In the blink of an eye, 2 arms became 4 arms, 4 arms became 8 arms, and soon there were countless arms. In her hands, she was holding a long sword, a treasure wheel, a vajra, a steel whip, a trident, and other weapons. She rushed toward Li Yundong aggressively. Li Yundong saw that Tachibana Wakako had attacked again and again. He had shown mercy, but not only did she not know how to retreat, but she even became more aggressive and attacked again and again. He suddenly became furious and shouted, "You don't know what's good for you." The Jinshi in Li Yundong's whole body suddenly burst out. A crack instantly appeared on his forehead, and a golden vertical pupil appeared. His yang spirit instantly came out of the vertical pupil and turned into the immovable Wisdom King with 3 heads and 6 arms, glaring angrily at him. The immovable Wisdom King sat on the lotus throne, which was burning with blazing flames. His whole body was wrapped in a ball of blue flames, making him look angry, ferocious, and terrifying. When Tachibana Wakako suddenly saw the immovable Wisdom King, she was so shocked that she stopped moving. She looked at the immovable Wisdom King in front of her, who was the leader of all Wisdom Kings and the king of all Wisdom Kings. She suddenly opened her mouth wide and couldn't say a word. Li Yundong was angry that Tachibana Wakako didn't know what was good for her. He turned his hand and slapped her on the forehead. Although Mahamayuri was also a great supreme Wisdom King, the immovable Wisdom King was the incarnation of Buddha Tathagata, the Wisdom King who commanded all the Wisdom Kings in the world. He suddenly collided with the immovable Wisdom King, as if he had seen his natural enemy. In the blink of an eye, his divine power dissipated and turned into countless colorful streams of light that gushed out of Tachibana Wakako's body and returned to the flag standing on the ground. Even Mahamayuri had to retreat, let alone the witch spirit in Tachibana Wakako's body. The ancestral witch spirit of Tachibana Wakako fled into the depths of Tachibana Wakako's divine sense in an instant and didn't dare to come out again. Tachibana Wakako also turned back into an innocent little girl. She looked at the angry immovable Wisdom King with frightened eyes and slapped her with his palm. She suddenly lost all her resistance and consciousness. Subconsciously, she curled her lips and cried out in fear. Chapter 506. Go to watch net. Li Yundong's palm had originally wanted to take Tachibana Wakako's life, but when it hit her head, she was so scared that she burst into tears. The anger in Li Yundong's heart suddenly dissipated a lot. His palm stopped in front of Tachibana Wakako's forehead. His face was as cold as water, and he looked at her sternly. "Are you convinced?" Tachibana Wakako's face was full of horror, and tears fell down her face. She nodded like a chicken pecking rice. "I'm convinced." "Don't hit me." Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Tachibana Wakako's crying made him feel like he was bullying a child, but his expression was still dignified. He stared at her coldly and asked, "Are there any masters in mainland China?" Tachibana Wakako raised her head and looked at the terrifying and majestic vertical eye on Li Yundong's forehead. Her teeth were chattering, as if a little sheep had seen a lion or a fierce tiger. She stammered and cried, yes, you are a master. Li Yundong nodded. He withdrew his palm, and the yang spirit, which had turned into the immovable Wisdom King, quickly went back along his glaring vertical eye. Go to watch net. As soon as Li Yundong's yang spirit entered his body, the vertical eye on his forehead slowly closed and gradually disappeared. Tachibana Wakako saw that Li Yundong's forehead was smooth, as if the terrifying Wisdom King's eye had never appeared. However, Tachibana Wakako no longer dared to underestimate Li Yundong, nor did she dare to be disrespectful or offensive to him. She looked at Li Yundong as if she had seen her natural enemy, and her eyes were full of awe and fear. In Buddhism, the Tathagata Gautama Buddha was the most powerful. Although the Tathagata Gautama Buddha had boundless Buddhist power, he was merciful and restrained himself from anger. He could even feed an eagle with his own body. Therefore, the Tathagata Gautama Buddha would not personally fight. Even if he encountered the monkey son, he would only teach him a lesson with a flip of his palm. However, if the Tathagata Gautama Buddha was attacked by demons and ghosts, or if he encountered the terrible difficulties of Buddhism, the Tathagata Gautama Buddha's anger would turn into Wisdom Kings. In the world of Buddhist cultivation, whether it was ancient Indian Buddhism, Chinese Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, or Japanese Buddhism, these different schools of Buddhism recognized the Akalanatha as the most powerful Akalanatha. When other gods saw him, they would have to bow down to him. Japanese people had always worshipped the strongest, so most of the statues in the Kongabuji temple in Ragoino were of the immovable Wisdom King. In the entire Ragoino mountain temple, all the statues were not as many as the statues of the immovable Wisdom King. Even the statue of Tathagata Buddha, who had the highest status, was not as many as the statues of the immovable Wisdom King. It could be said that Mount Koya was the Taoist field of the immovable Wisdom King. Tachibana Wakako had grown up in Mount Koya, and her awe and worship of the immovable Wisdom King had been deeply rooted in her heart. Therefore, when she suddenly saw the Wisdom King's Fazhen, she was immediately scared and lost any ability to resist. The most important thing was that the vertical eye on Li Yundong's forehead emitted a majestic and awe-inspiring light. This kind of light represented an overwhelming power, making her unable to move even if she wanted to be his enemy. In Tachibana Wakako's subconscious, a thought suddenly flashed through her mind. Is this person the reincarnation of the immovable Wisdom King? Otherwise, how could he have the divine power of the immovable Wisdom King's Fazhen? However, Tachibana Wakako could see his Wisdom King's vertical eye when facing Li Yundong, but the others behind Li Yundong could not see it. They did not know that what really deterred Tachibana Wakako was the Wisdom King's eye on Li Yundong's forehead. They only saw that Li Yundong's yang spirit body suddenly turned into a statue of a god with 3 heads and 6 arms, and with a palm, he slapped at Tachibana Wakako, who was so scared that she burst into tears. Everyone was dumbfounded, and they couldn't help but laugh. They said, "It can't be, right? She was beaten to tears? What the hell? Don't you know how to bleed or not cry? What kind of cultivator is she? But she's just a little girl." Bah, what little girl? Have you ever seen a little girl be so powerful before? Could it be that this Tachibana Wakako is strong in appearance but weak in reality? Otherwise, how could Jinrenli be scared to tears before he even hit her? Bullshit. If you have the ability, go up and try it yourself. Tisk, do you think I don't want to? Isn't Jinrenli ahead of me? Damn it, you only know how to talk after the fact. If you have the ability, go and challenge Jinrenli now. You, what are you talking about? Don't you know that we shouldn't attack our own people? Bah, who shouted at Jinrenli just now? For a moment, everyone was talking at once. Su Chan, Zi Yuan, Zhou Qin, and the others, who had been watching the scene nervously, saw that Li Yundong had subdued the extremely powerful witch, Tachibana Wakako, with one palm. They immediately shouted excitedly, and the little foxes were even more excited, as if their leader was in the limelight on the field, which was even more satisfying and happy than if they were in the limelight themselves. One of the little foxes shouted, "Long live the sect leader, long live the sect leader for 10,000 autumns and 10,000 years, unify the Jianghu." The little foxes were used to laughing. Although they had been scolded by Li Yundong before, at this moment, they suddenly won a great victory. For a moment, they were so proud that they even shouted in unison, "Long live the leader! Long live the leader and unify the Jianghu!" When they shouted, Su Chan and Wan Hongling didn't feel anything. Instead, they smiled, but Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin were stunned at the same time. They quickly glanced at the cultivators of the various sects around them. Fortunately, at this time, the cultivators of the various sects were immersed in the joy of the victory, and not many people noticed this sentence. Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin breathed a sigh of relief. After Li Yundong withdrew his palm, he said to Tachibana Wakako, "Let me tell you, there are countless hidden dragons and crouching tigers in China. Even I am not a master. You have never seen a real master, and neither have I. Therefore, don't look at the divine land with the eyes of a frog at the bottom of a well. Otherwise, you will only humiliate yourself." Tachibana Wakako wiped her tears and nodded subconsciously. "I see, I won't do it again." Li Yundong saw that she was crying pitifully. He was originally a person who had tender feelings for the fairer sex. His heart softened, and he sighed secretly. He turned to the cultivators of the various sects and said, "Everyone, I think we should just let this matter go. What do you think?" The cultivators of the various sects looked at each other and thought to themselves, "You, Jinrenli, won this battle. Of course, you can say what to do." Everyone responded loudly, "Jinrenli, let's do as you say." Although the people of the Qingqing sect and the Jingyi school, who had been beaten the most miserably, were unwilling, at least Zi Yuan had taught Xinxiu a lesson. Li Yundong had also beaten their witch until she cried on the spot. Cultivators valued their reputation the most. They would rather die than lose face, so they also echoed, "Jinrenli, you make your own decision." Li Yundong nodded, then turned to Wan Jinyuan and said, "Master Wan, what do you think?" Wan Jinyuan saw that Li Yundong had won a great victory. Not only did he not pursue the previous coercion of the crowd, but he also took care of the faces of the major sections. The most surprising thing was that he was so respected by everyone. Not only was he not complacent, but he was also careful enough to turn around and ask for his opinion. It could be seen that this person's heart was beautiful and shrewd. He really couldn't be taken lightly. Wan Jinyuan was very vigilant. "I'm afraid that the old fox has chosen the wrong person. Li Yundong is young, but he has such a high bearing. I've never seen such a person in my life. Such a person will definitely not be willing to be controlled by others and be a puppet." Although Wan Jinyuan was alarmed in his heart, he said with a smile on his face, "Jinrenli, you're really polite. With your divine power, you not only saved the face of the various sects in the cultivation world, but also won glory for the Chinese cultivation world. As a spectator, how can I say anything?" Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "Master Wan, you are the host of this Taoist assembly. Of course, I have to listen to your opinion." Although Wan Jinyuan was on guard against Li Yundong, he still felt proud when he heard this. He was overjoyed and said with a smile, "Well, I'll say something for your reference, Jinrenli." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Master Wan, please go ahead." Wan Jinyuan smiled and said, "Let the three pure ones become the three pure ones, and let the Buddha return to the Buddha. Let them go back to where they came from." Everyone laughed and shouted at Tachibana Wakako, Xinxiu, and Xinyan, Japanese, "Get out of here." Xinyan and Xinxiu were ashamed and angry at the same time. They stood where they were with red faces and ears. Xinyan shouted at Tachibana Wakako, "Tachibana Wakako, let's go." Tachibana Wakako lowered her head, put away her powerful magical weapon, and then walked toward Xinyan with small steps. But after a few steps, she turned around and muttered as if she wanted to ask Li Yundong something, but when the words came to her mouth, she swallowed them back. Tachibana Wakako looked at Li Yundong in awe. Finally, she turned around and walked to Xinyan with small steps. She lowered her head and followed him down the small building. As she walked, she repeatedly muttered in her heart, "Is he the reincarnation of the immovable Wisdom King?" Xinyan's face was livid, and he put his hands in his sleeves. When the three of them were far away, Xinyan turned his face and scolded Tachibana Wakako with an ugly expression, "Baka. Tachibana Wakako, how can you lose without fighting? You were actually scared to tears by him. You really lost face for our Mount Koya. Did you stay in the Okunin for nothing? Can't the power of the ancestral gods give you the courage to fight? If I were you, I would have committed suicide on the spot. This is really a great shame that I haven't seen in 100 years." Tachibana Wakako's eyes were full of tears when she was scolded by Xinyan. She couldn't help arguing in a loud voice, "But this guy is too strong. I'm no match for him." Xinyan flew into a rage. How strong can he be? Isn't it just a yang spirit statue with 3 heads and 6 arms? That's what he visualized. The yang spirit of a Taoist cultivator can transform into any shape. It only has the appearance, but it doesn't have divine power. How can you be so easily frightened? You disappoint me so much. Shinsu, who had been silent all this time, couldn't help but blame Miss Tachibana Wakako. "It's not that I want to criticize you, but although you are a witch, you are also the best of the warriors who have inherited the spirit of our Yamato people. How can you lose without fighting?" Tachibana Wakako cried, but there is also a vertical pupil on his forehead. As soon as the spirit of Mahamayuri that I summoned saw his vertical pupil, it went back into the 8-part divine streamer. The spirit of the ancestors which also didn't dare to come out. What could I do? Xinyan was stunned. There is also a vertical pupil on his forehead? Tachibana Wakako said loudly, "Yes. The gaze in the vertical pupil on his forehead is too scary. I just took a look at it and I couldn't move." Xinyan was shocked. Why didn't I see it? Tachibana Wakako felt wronged by Xinyan's scolding. She shouted at Xinyan, "He has his back to you. Of course you can't see it." Xinyan looked at Tachibana Wakako in surprise. He couldn't help but take a deep breath. Vertical pupils can appear on his body? Is this the Dharmakaya of Wisdom King? Tachibana Wakako wiped her tears and said, "I think so too, but I didn't dare to ask." Xinyan's face darkened and he said in a low voice, "What Tachibana Wakako said is not impossible. Otherwise, why couldn't so many ghosts and Vajra get close to him just now, and why did Mahamayuri disappear automatically when he got close to him? If he wasn't the immovable Wisdom King, how could he resist the power of a true god like Mahamayuri?" Shinsu, who was standing to one side, was stunned. When he thought that he had wanted to challenge the Dharmakaya of Wisdom King before, he couldn't help but shudder. He stammered, "Is this man named Li Yundong really the reincarnation of the immovable Wisdom King? How did the immovable Wisdom King worshipped by Arjunian Tantrism reincarnate into the Chinese cultivation world? Could it be that he wants to destroy our Rigoino?" Xinyan's face was very ugly. He advised, "Shinsu, don't think too much. Even if there are masters in China, there is no need to worry, because no matter how powerful Li Yundong is, there will be someone to help us deal with him. Chinese people like internal strife, which is a deep-rooted habit and national character. For them, the real trouble is not outsiders like us, but their own people, even this Li Yundong." After that, he sighed, stroked Tachibana Wakako's hair, and said softly, "I'm sorry, Tachibana Wakako, I misunderstood you. Since this Li Yundong is the reincarnation of the immovable Wisdom King, it's useless no matter how powerful you are. Let's go back first. When we go back, tell Zongbanshan the news of the reincarnation of the immovable Wisdom King, and then we'll think of a way." Just as Xinyan, Tachibana Wakako, and Shinsu were discussing countermeasures, the cultivators, who had lost the threat of foreign aggression, suddenly found themselves in a dilemma. Previously, they had forced Li Yundong to withdraw from the Taoist assembly, but at this time, 3 Japanese had appeared and defeated them. If Li Yundong hadn't turned the tide in the end, they would have lost all face in this Taoist assembly. But what if Li Yundong threatened them to participate in the Taoist assembly again with the grace of a great victory? This guy's fighting methods were already so terrifying, and he had such a powerful magical weapon. From now on, who in the world could be his opponent? Li Yundong was already so powerful at such a young age. What would happen if he cultivated for a few more years? Could it be that it was really as those fox spirits had said, unified Jianghu for thousands of years? The joy of the cultivators of all sects gradually faded, and everyone fell into deep thought and struggle. Chapter 507. Go to watch net. As soon as Ximian and the others left, Li Yundong keenly felt that the atmosphere in the field had changed significantly. All kinds of suspicion, fear, awe, and admiration were surging toward Li Yundong like a flood. Go to watch net. For a moment, no one spoke. The cultivators of all sects were afraid that Li Yundong would say that he wanted to continue to fight, but because of Li Yundong's previous help, no one was willing to stand up and be the villain. After thinking about it for a moment, Li Yundong figured out the key to it. He smiled slightly and cupped his hands to Wan Jinyuan, who was beside him. Master Wan, since the Japanese have left, let's continue with the Taoist assembly. Please continue to fight. I'll just watch from the side. When Wan Jinyuan saw that Li Yundong had taken the initiative to ask to fight, his evaluation of Li Yundong immediately increased. He said with some admiration, "Jinrenli, aren't you going to fight?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "Since I've already said that I won't fight, I naturally can't fight again. No matter what happens, there can be no exception. Moreover, defeating the Japanese is a matter of justice for cultivators. This is a public matter, while what we decided at the Taoist assembly is a private matter. As a person, we can't abandon the public for private reasons, nor can we abandon the public for private reasons." Wan Jinyuan couldn't help but form a palm with one hand and salute Li Yundong. He praised, "Amitba. Jinrenli is young and promising. Not only are you good at fighting, but your cultivation is also amazing. What's more, you are broad-minded and elegant. I admire you." Li Yundong smiled slightly and returned the salute. "Master Wan, you're too polite." After that, he walked down the stage slowly. Li Yundong walked to his seat and saw that Su Chan, Zi Yuan, Zhou Qin, and the others were all smiling brightly, as if they were welcoming a victorious general. Su Chan even gave him a thumbs up with a smile and said with a smile, "Yundong, you're so powerful. It's a pity that the immortal pen is gone." Ruan Hongling also sighed and said, "Yes, these unscrupulous guys forget morality at the sight of profit and repay kindness with enmity. Without Li Yundong, they wouldn't have been able to raise their heads in the future. Now, you still have selfish thoughts and want to get the immortal pen. Humph, who do you think you are?" Li Yundong smiled disapprovingly and said, "You can't say that. Me taking the immortal pen is just the icing on the cake. They taking the immortal pen is a timely help. Moreover, the reason why I stood up was for Zi Yuan's sake and for the sake of our Chinese cultivation world. It's not for this immortal pen. You can't be mistaken about this." Zi Yuan also nodded and said with admiration, "Li Yundong has handled this matter very well. He is generous and has the demeanor of a great cultivator." Ruan Hongling blinked, glanced at Zi Yuan, and then at Li Yundong. She covered her mouth and said with a smile, "Well, you only know how to speak up for him. Fine, I'm the villain, okay?" Zi Yuan glared at Ruan Hongling and scolded with a blushing face, "Shut up." Ruan Hongling immediately cried out in grievance, "I didn't say anything. Can't I say that I'm the villain?" Zi Yuan was so ashamed and angry that she stepped on Ruan Hongling under the table. Ruan Hongling immediately cried out and shouted, "Someone stepped on me. Li Yundong, you have to uphold justice." Li Yundong coughed dryly and said, "Keep your voice down. Everyone is watching." Ruan Hongling quickly glanced around. Sure enough, she saw all kinds of eyes looking at them. Ruan Hongling then changed her expression and said to Li Yundong in a low voice, "Hey, there's nothing to see next, right? Why don't we leave?" Zhou Qin also whispered, "Yes, master, we've watched so many battles. I don't think there will be any high-level battles next. Why don't we leave? I feel that there's something wrong with the way these people are looking at us. It's weird. Li Yundong looked around, thought for a moment, and said, well, since you all say so, let's go back. As he said this, he was about to stand up, but he saw Wang Jinyuan sigh to the crowd and say, fellow Taoists, I, Wang Jinyuan, would like to apologize to you for what happened. If I hadn't asked these Japanese to come up, such a thing wouldn't have happened. Although the cultivators of the various sects agreed with him, they all said, Master Wan, you can't say that. It's these Japanese who came uninvited. If we force them out, maybe these Japanese will say that our Chinese cultivation world is not magnanimous and can't tolerate them. Yes, Master Wan, this is not your fault. You don't have to blame yourself. Wang Jinyuan laughed and said, thank you for your magnanimity, but I am more or less responsible for this matter. It's not right if I don't apologize. Everyone also laughed, and Dang Cheng also joined in and joked, Sect Master Wan, since you feel ashamed, then hurry up and ask the little girl who sang just now to sing 2 more songs for us. Everyone burst into laughter and clamored, that's right, Sect Leader Wan, let that chick sing 2 more songs. Wang Jinyuan laughed and saw that the little girl who had sung before was standing timidly in the corner near the back door with a pipa in her arms. Like a frightened deer, she looked at the cultivators on the field vigilantly and nervously. Wang Jinyuan waved at her with a smile and said, Xiao Qiao, come here. Everyone is waiting for you to sing Pingtan. The girl named Xiao Qiao walked over timidly with the pipa in her arms. She glanced at the crowd with her watery eyes and then lowered them in panic, like a mimosa. Dang Cheng laughed and said, Xiao Qiao. Are you Xiao Qiao from Copper Sparrow Spring? Wang Jinyuan smiled and said to Xiao Qiao, would you like to introduce yourself to the seniors of all sects? Xiao Qiao lowered her head and stared at her shoes. She didn't dare to raise her head. She said in a crisp voice, my name is Song Yu Qiao, and I'm Qiao from Copper Sparrow Spring, not Qiao from Copper Sparrow Spring. When the cultivators of all sects heard her speak, their clear and delicate voice made them feel as if they had eaten a ginseng fruit. There was a refreshing feeling in their pores. Dang Cheng pointed at Song Yuqiao and said with a smile, little girl, you weren't shy just now. Why are you so shy now? Song Yuqiao's whole body trembled almost imperceptibly. She looked up at the crowd and immediately lowered her head even more. Everyone burst into laughter. Although Wang Jinyuan felt a little strange, he still smiled and tried to smooth things over for Song Yuqiao. He said, this is a new outer disciple of our Gazao sect. She may not have seen much of the world, so she may have been a little afraid when she saw you fighting just now. So please don't be offended. Everyone laughed and said, it's not strange at all. It's already very good that she can immediately sing Pingtan after seeing such a frightening fight just now. Some cultivators laughed loudly and said, Master Wan, let me have your disciple. Wang Jinyuan looked at the person who had spoken with a smile and said, are you looking for a disciple or a wife? Everyone laughed, and Song Yuqiao was so shy that her face turned red. Wang Jinyuan smiled and said, everyone, please let this little disciple of mine go. Besides, if you want to listen to a song, let her sing. We don't need to be long-winded. Everyone agreed in unison. Dang Cheng touched his bald head and said to Song Yuqiao with a smile, Xiao Qiao, what are you singing? Song Yuqiao whispered, it depends on what you want to hear. Her voice was as soft as a mosquito. If it weren't for the fact that everyone present was a good cultivator, they probably wouldn't have been able to hear her at all. Wang Jinyuan's heart skipped a beat. He suddenly said to the crowd, everyone, just now, Jinrenli showed his divine power and drove away these arrogant Japanese. We haven't thanked him yet. Why don't we ask Jinrenli to choose a song as our thanks? Everyone immediately said in unison, that's a good idea. Wang Jinyuan said to Li Yundong with a smile, Jinrenli, don't stand on ceremony. Just choose one. Li Yundong saw that everyone was looking at him, so he didn't stand on ceremony. He smiled slightly and said, well, what are you best at? When Song Yuqiao heard Li Yundong's gentle voice, it was as if a warm current had flowed into her heart, making her involuntarily want to trust him. She boldly raised her head and looked at him, only to see that the man who had been like a god in the fight was smiling at her. His eyes were as approachable as the sunshine in April. Song Yuqiao couldn't help but feel a little curious. She thought to herself, Master said that Li Yundong is the best person in the world who helps a villain do evil. He is lustful, violent, and arrogant. But why do I feel that he is a daring, responsible, loyal, and skilled man? Could it be that Master was wrong? No, Master couldn't have been wrong. Maybe I was wrong. Song Yuqiao stared at Li Yundong in a daze and forgot to reply for a moment. When everyone saw this, they laughed and said, Master Wan, your little disciple is in love. Song Yuqiao suddenly came to her senses after being teased by them. She was so shy that her ears seemed to be dripping blood. She whispered, the legend of the white snake is what I'm best at. When Li Yundong heard this, he thought to himself, why is this girl singing songs about subduing demons? He didn't take it to heart, so he said with a smile, well, you can sing this. Song Yuqiao didn't dare to look at Li Yundong again. She held the pipa and bowed to everyone, then sat down. At this time, a Pingtan woman with a sanxian in her arms came out from the back door and sat down beside her. Seeing that everyone's attention was focused on the two of them, Wan Zhenyuan smiled slightly, turned around, and walked out of the back door. As soon as he went out, he turned a corner, walked through 2 long corridors, and came to a classical wooden house. He pushed the door open, and walked in. As soon as Wan Zhenyuan entered the door, he saw a tall man leaning against the window, his eyes fixed on the outside, as if he was looking at the singing building in the distance. After a while, a small paper crane flew into his hand. Wan Zhenyuan asked in a deep voice, did you see it? The man nodded slightly and didn't turn around. His figure was like a silent mountain, giving people a strong sense of pressure. Wan Zhenyuan snorted coldly and said, are you sure you can control such a person? Can you imagine how powerful and terrifying a cultivator who can dispel Mahamayuri in a fight is? The man was silent for a long time, then sighed softly. From the day he set foot on the Qinghai, Tibet plateau, I could vaguely feel that his future was limitless, but I still underestimated him. Wan Zhenyuan asked, are you sure you want to continue with your plan? The man didn't comment. He said in a deep voice, the arrow is on the bowstring, and it has to be shot. Don't worry, I have a way. Wan Zhenyuan looked at the man's back with uncertain eyes and said slowly, you'd better be sure. Otherwise, if you fail, I will fall out with you. With that, he snorted and turned to leave. Only this person was left in the room, looking at the small paper crane in his hand with a smile. With a shake of his palm, the small paper crane flew up with a whoosh and flew in the direction of the melodious sound of Pingtan. The man's lips curled into a meaningful smile. The show has just begun. 8. Yeah. Chapter 508. Go to watch net. After Li Yundong selected The Legend of the White Snake, he turned to Su Chan and the others and said with a smile, she asked me to select a song. I can't just leave, can I? At least listen to it. Zi Yuan smiled and said, well, it's rare to see such a high-level Pingtan. Go to watch net. 7. K.O.M. This girl may have been in primary school, and I don't know which famous teacher she studied under. Zhou Qin asked curiously, why did she join the Gazao sect? Zi Yuan smiled and said, now all the sects are secretly expanding their strength. Zhini School is busy gathering the branches of the sect, and Xuanzhen Dragon's sect is busy collecting the ancient books and Taoist magic that have been scattered in the cultivation world. As for the Gazao sect, it is desperately making money and then trying its best to develop its believers. Although there aren't many masters from the Gazao sect in this year's Taoist assembly, in the cultivation world, the Gazao sect is the richest, and they also have the most external disciples. They can be said to be full of talents. Su Chan couldn't help but sigh. Yundong, when will we be able to sell medicine? How nice it would be to make money and buy such a big garden. Li Yundong pretended to be angry and glared at her. He scratched the tip of her nose with his fingertip and scolded her in a low voice. You wicked girl, you are too greedy. We used to live in a small rental house, and we were happy, weren't we? Later, we lived in a big house with 3 bedrooms and 2 living rooms. Weren't you also very happy? Later on, it was changed to a large compound house. But now, you little girl, you're eyeing this kind of small garden. Do you think I run a bank? Su Chan grabbed Li Yundong's arm and said with a coquettish smile, I was just saying. As long as I'm with you, I'll be happy even if I have to live on the streets. If I can't be with you, even if I live in the palace, it will be like a year for me. Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. He tapped the tip of the little girl's crystal pink nose and said with a smile, You're good at talking. But no matter how useless I am, I won't let you live on the streets, will I? Su Chan nodded hard with a smile and said, Of course. My Yundong is a great hero. Li Yundong couldn't help but recall that when the two of them were at their lowest point, Su Chan had loudly declared to the landlord and Rongguofa that she would definitely become a great hero in the future. Thinking back to the scene at that time, and then thinking back to the scene in front of him, Li Yundong really felt like a lifetime had passed. He chuckled and lovingly stroked the little girl's hair. Silly girl, what kind of hero am I? Su Chan said with a serious face, Why isn't he a hero? No one here was a match for the Japanese. You were the only one who drove them away, bringing glory to the Chinese cultivation world. What else could you be if not a hero? Zhou Qin also nodded and looked at him with admiration, saying, That's right. If it weren't for you, master, who turned the tide, I'm afraid we would have lost face this time. Li Yundong shook his head and said with a smile, It's just a coincidence. There are countless masters in the divine land. Even if we lose today, we can win tomorrow. The Japanese cultivation world is blessed by nature and has a quiet and stable cultivation environment. Especially this time, they came prepared, so they caught all the sects by surprise. But after all, their population is small and their territory is small. Moreover, their cultivation world originated in the Tang dynasty, while our cultivation world can be traced back to the time of Pengzu and Laozi, which is 1 or 2,000 years earlier than them. Li Yundong said with a sigh, although our cultivation world has suffered all kinds of blows and has declined so far, after all, it has been passed down for thousands of years. As the saying goes, a skinny camel is still bigger than a horse. In terms of a deep foundation and a large number of talents, the Japanese cultivation world is far from being comparable to us. They can win for a while, but they can't win for a lifetime. Zi Yuan also nodded and said, That's right. As far as I know, most of the masters of the Zhuni school this time are masters of the younger generation. The only one who can represent the older generation is Zhang Ling. And Zhang Ling's magic must be earth-shattering. If she had fought just now, she might not have lost to Tachibana Wakako. However, in such a busy city, she couldn't use 10% of her ability, so she was very worried and didn't go on stage. Moreover, not only the Zhuni school, but the older generation of cultivators of the Chuanjin Dragon sect, Qingqing sect, Jinshan sect, and other sects are also very powerful. It's just that most of them cultivate in seclusion and hardly walk in the world. Li Yundong nodded and said with a smile, A centipede is dead but not stiff. What's more, the cultivation world can be said to be full of talents now. I believe that it won't be long before there will be a few great cultivators. When Li Yundong said this, he looked at Zhou Qin. It was obvious that he was encouraging and appreciating her. Zhou Qin's heart warmed up and she nodded vigorously. Ruan Hongling, who was beside her, said with a smile, Li Yundong, you even praised yourself, didn't you? After this Taoist assembly, you can also be regarded as a great cultivator, right? Shiji Zi Yuan, don't you think so? Zi Yuan smiled slightly and said, In terms of fighting strength and reputation, Li Yundong can indeed be called a great cultivator. Li Yundong waved his hand and said with a smile, "Don't flatter me. I haven't even cultivated to the Jinshan phase. How dare I call myself a great cultivator? Those who have cultivated to the Jinshan phase have yang spirits that are truly indestructible. No magical weapon in the world can kill them. Only such cultivators can be called great cultivators. I'm still far from that." Su Chan said seriously, "Yundong, you will definitely become a great cultivator, and your speed will be very fast. Think about how long you've been cultivating, and now you're already so powerful." Li Yundong smiled and said, "To cultivate to the Jinshan phase, one must have the help of Dun Jin Dan. Without a great opportunity, one can't cultivate." While they were talking, they saw that Song Yuqiao had already tuned the strings. She coughed softly, cleared her throat, and then began to sing softly. As soon as everyone heard her speak, they immediately quieted down. For a moment, there was no sound in the small building. Everyone looked at Song Yuqiao with bright eyes and held their breath. Song Yuqiao's 5 fingers were gently twisted, and her diamond-shaped red lips were gently opened and closed. She sang in a soft and beautiful voice, "The West Lake is here again today, and the past is painful to think about. Through ups and downs, we cross the boat together, and we see the sincerity of Su Hanwen. It's rare for an official to have such good feelings, and to respect and pity each other is a blind date. Who would have thought that good flowers would meet merciless rain, and the bright moon would meet thousands of miles of clouds? Now the flowers have fallen, and the moon is not clear. I can't bear to look back on the old feelings. I only hate Monk Fa Hai, who is a monk who meddles in other people's affairs and breaks up the lovers." Song Yuqiao's voice was soft but crisp, charming but clear, especially when she was shy and speechless before. But when she sang Ping Tan, she suddenly forgot all her shyness. Her expression was sad, and her eyes were sad and moving. Even those who didn't understand the lyrics could instantly get into the mood of the lyrics and music. Li Yundong saw that Song Yuqiao was singing an excerpt from the legend of the White Snake. He couldn't help laughing and said, "What a coincidence. I have Fa Hai's burning thumb pot in my hand. It must have been this burning thumb pot that dealt with the white snake that year. Now that it's in my hands, who do you think I'll deal with?" Su Chan made a face at Li Yundong and said with a smile, "Anyway, don't deal with me." Li Yundong laughed and moved closer to Su Chan. "Little girl, if you don't listen to me, I'll teach you a lesson," he said in a low voice. Su Chan's ears turned red. She giggled and said, "You're so annoying." The two of them were talking intimately as if there was no one else around. Song Yuqiao had already finished singing the play. At this time, the people upstairs were cheering loudly. There were also cultivators who shouted, "It's good, but it's a little too miserable. Sing something cheerful." After Song Yuqiao finished singing, she became extremely shy again. She lowered her head and said softly, "Then wait for me to go in and change before I come out." As she spoke, she walked towards the back door with light steps. Everyone laughed and said, "This little girl is not young, but she's quite arrogant. She wants to go in and change her clothes after singing a cheerful song." After a while, Song Yuqiao came out from the back. Everyone saw that she hadn't changed her table much. She was just wearing a pair of gold hairpin jewelry on her head. The gold hairpin was strung with a bright flower. The flower was colorful. There were all kinds of colors. It looked bright and dazzling. She walked over gracefully, and there was a fragrance on her body, which was intoxicating. Song Yuqiao sat down with the pipa in her arms. After a while, she said, "Everyone wants to listen to a cheerful song, but I have only learned a cheerful song. Moreover, the master who taught me to sing once told me that if I wanted to sing this song, I had to worship her first before I could sing it." The cultivation world respected teachers the most. When everyone heard this, they were all in awe and said one after another, "Good, filial disciple. It's rare, it's really rare." After Song Yuqiao got up, she said to Wang Jinyuan apologetically, "Master Wan, I'm really sorry. Can I go burn some incense? Wang Jinyuan had never heard Song Yuchia mention this rule before. Although he felt it was strange, he didn't take it to heart. He smiled and said, "Of course." Song Yuchia got up again, walked to the back hall, and came in with an incense burner in both hands. Everyone saw that there were 3 sticks of incense on the incense burner. Green smoke curled up, and the fragrance was pleasant. Song Yuchia bowed to the incense burner, then sat back in her seat. She gently plucked the strings of the zither with her fingers and began to sing softly again. The clouds think of clothes, the flowers think of beauty, the spring breeze brushes the railings, and the dew is thick. If we don't meet at the top of the Jade Mountain, we will meet under the moon at the Yaotai. A branch of red dew condenses the fragrance, and the Wushan Mountain is broken in vain. Who in the Han Palace looks like it? Pitiful swallows rely on new makeup. Famous flowers fall in love with each other, and the emperor looks at them with a smile. Explaining the infinite hatred of the spring breeze, the Agarwood Pavilion leans north to dry. Li Jiandong listened to her sad singing, like a resentful woman in her boudoir. Where was the slightest joy? He couldn't help but ask curiously, "What kind of song is this? Why doesn't it sound cheerful at all?" Zi Yuan's face was also full of doubts. She said, "This is Ying worships to the moon. It's strange. This song is very sad. How is it cheerful?" Not only did Li Jiandong and Zi Yuan feel strange, but the cultivators of all the sects upstairs also felt very strange. They all said, "Hey, such a sad song, how is it cheerful?" "Little girl, did you sing wrong?" Wang Jinyuan couldn't help frowning and saying, "Xiao Qiao, what are you singing?" Song Yuqiao lowered her head and did not speak, but a cold woman's voice suddenly came from not far away. "Aren't you happy?" "But I feel very cheerful." Everyone looked up and saw a beautiful and coquettish woman standing at the back door, looking at them with a sneer on her face. As soon as Li Jiandong, Su Chan, and the others saw this woman, they were shocked. Su Chan said in surprise, "Isn't this Shibua Zhuang Yiting? Why is she here?" My cousin and his niece came home today. Sorry, the update is late. There should be one more chapter, but don't wait, it will be very late. Vote recommendation previous page next page error report if you like. Please click here to add Keeping a Fox at Home to your bookshelf, so that you can read the latest chapters and updates of Keeping a Fox at Home in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Keeping a Fox at Home, please click here to express your views. Chapter 509. Go to watch net. They all looked surprised. Go to watch net. But soon, they came to their senses. There was a cold and sarcastic smile on Zhuang Yiting's face, which made their hearts skip a beat. They thought to themselves, "No, what's wrong with Shibua Zhuang Yiting?" When the little fox's eyes met Zhuang Yiting's, they immediately screamed in their hearts, "No, this is not Shibua Zhuang Yiting." Zhuang Yiting's eyes were full of hatred, as if she wanted to cut everyone in the Fox Zen school into pieces. The little foxes looked at Zhuang Yiting in horror. They had vaguely guessed what was going on, but no one dared to say it out loud. At this time, the cultivators of the various sects upstairs had no idea what had happened in the Fox Zen school. Some of them didn't know Zhuang Yiting, so they frowned and scolded, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" Some cultivators who had gone to Mount Tianlong to participate in the siege of the Fox Zen school recognized Zhuang Yiting at a glance. They shouted at Li Yundong, "Jinrenli, how do you discipline your subordinates?" Li Yundong looked at Zhuang Yiting with a cold face and said in a cold voice, "She is not my subordinate, nor is she a member of the Fox Zen school." The people who had spoken were stunned and didn't understand what Li Yundong meant. Wang Jinyuan frowned and said to Zhuang Yiting, "You should be Jinren Zhuang of the Fox Zen school, right? Today, for the sake of Jinrenli, I won't argue with you. Please sit down on the sidelines." Zhuang Yiting laughed and said, "Wang Jinyuan, what right do you have to yell at me? I beat you up on Mount Gazao and you couldn't even raise your head. Have you forgotten?" Wang Zhenyuan's heart skipped a beat. He suddenly opened his eyes wide and said in surprise, "You are Yan Fang?" When the crowd heard this, there was an uproar. Yan Fang? Yan Fang of the Linggong sect? It can't be. There were also some young cultivators who didn't know Yan Fang's reputation. They quickly asked, "Who is Yan Fang? Is she very powerful?" Immediately, an old and experienced cultivator said, "Hey, boy, listen carefully. Yan Fang was a famous female cultivator in the past. Before Yan Fang disappeared, she had always been known as the #1 master among female cultivators and also the #1 beauty. It wasn't until she suddenly disappeared one day that the title of the #1 female cultivator in the world slowly fell to Ziyuan. Then why did Yan Fang suddenly disappear? Hey, Yan Fang is so arrogant that she doesn't like any man in the world. She only has a crush on her Shixiang Wang Yuanshan, but her Shixiang Wang Yuanshan fell in love with Ao Wushuang of the Fox Zen School in the end. As a result, in a fit of anger, Yan Fang exposed their relationship to Celestial Master Zhang, the head of the Zhenyi school, and forced Wang Yuanshan to leave Ao Wushuang with the powerful power of the sect. Yan Fang originally thought that she could save her love this way, but the result was exactly the opposite. Wang Yuanshan would rather choose immortalization than her. Yan Fang is so powerful and is known as the #1 beauty. Why didn't Wang Yuanshan choose her? Why did he choose a vixen? TSK, kid, you don't understand. Look at those vixens next to her. Which one of them isn't a stunner? TSK, if a man can have a companion, he will be as happy as a god. The feeling is really indescribable. Martial uncle, the way you speak is so lewd. Ahem, cut the crap. Yan Fang saw that Wang Yuanshan refused to turn back, so she thought that it was all because the vixen of the Fox Zen School had used a hypnosis method to charm her Shixiang and steal her marriage. Therefore, Yan Fang sneaked into the Fox Zen School in anger and hid for 9 years. A while ago, she suddenly appeared on Mount Tianlong. I see. It turns out that it was this Yan Fang. Was she the one who planned the siege of Mount Tianlong last time? Yes. She is worth teaching. If it weren't for Li Yundong, I'm afraid that the Fox Zen School would have been destroyed at that time. This Yan Fang is so vicious. In order to take revenge, she hid for 9 years and wanted to destroy the whole school. Haven't you heard of the saying that a woman's heart is the most vicious? Hey, this is the internal strife of the Fox Zen School. Let's watch the show. Well, watch the show. For a moment, everyone was talking about it. Those who knew Yan Fang greeted her loudly, but Yan Fang acted as if she didn't hear them. She just stared at Li Yundong. Zhang Ling, who had fought fiercely with Yan Fang on Mount Gazao last time, also had a strange light in her eyes. She looked at the woman in front of her, who was determined to destroy the Fox Zen School, in surprise and doubt. Zhou Ping whispered to Zhang Ling, "Master, there is internal strife in the Fox Zen School. Yan Fang is a member of our Zhenyi school. Should we intervene later?" Zhang Ling shouted in a low voice, "Shut up. Yan Fang is a scheming woman. Since she dares to show up now, it means that she already has a backup plan and a perfect plan. Right now, it's best for us to wait and see." Li Yundong looked at Zhuang Yiting in shock and said, "So you are Yan Fang?" Yan Fang laughed and said, "That's right." Li Yundong, you didn't expect this, did you?" Li Yundong said in a cold voice, "What about Chao Yi? What did you do to her?" Yan Fang snorted coldly and said, "You'd better take care of yourself first." Du Fei of the Chuanjin Dragon sect was very clear about the hatred between Yan Fang and the Fox Zen School. He stood up and said to Yan Fang, "Jinren Yan, as the saying goes, it's better to get rid of enmity than to keep it alive. The grudges between you and the Fox Zen School have accumulated to this day, and both sides have suffered heavy losses. The Linggong sect is now in a state of decline, and Jinren Zi Yuan can't support it alone. The Fox Zen School has been forced to leave their hometown, and countless people have died or been injured. Isn't it enough for you to take revenge to this extent? Why don't you stop? Yan Fang suddenly turned her head and glared at Du Fei. She scolded him sternly. Du Fei, what did you get from Li Yundong? Why are you speaking up for him like this? Du Fei said unhappily, Jinren Yan, I think you are blinded by a leaf and cannot see Mount Tai. Your eyes have been completely blinded by hatred. Jinren Li is open and aboveboard, selfless, generous, and elegant. I have never seen such a person in my life. And you, Jinren Yan, are also one of the weirdos in our cultivation world. I just want to preserve a little more vitality for our cultivation world, so I said something fair. What you said is an insult to me. Yan Fang stared at Du Fei coldly. She suddenly laughed and said, You idiot, you've been deceived by him and you still don't know it. Besides, do you really think that I just want revenge? You underestimate me. Du Fei frowned and said, Then why are you doing this, Jinren Yan? Yan Fang suddenly pointed at Li Yundong and said loudly, Fellow Taoists, today I'll let you know the true face of Li Yundong. When Zhou Qin saw Yan Fang pointing at Li Yundong and scolding him loudly, she was so angry that her whole body was trembling. She gritted her teeth, and her eyes were full of anger and hatred. In her opinion, anyone who offended Li Yundong was her enemy. She secretly vowed in her heart that she would make Yan Fang pay the price. Su Chan and the little foxes were also shocked and angry. They didn't know what kind of conspiracy Yan Fang had this time, nor did they know what kind of price they would have to pay this time. Li Yundong looked at Yan Fang coldly and said in a deep voice, Yan Fang, if you have something to say, just say it. I'd like to see what you're up to this time. Yan Fang sneered and said, It's hard to say who's up to this. After that, she said to the people present, Fellow Taoists, I admit that I, Yan Fang, sneaked into the Fox Zen School 9 years ago and really wanted to take revenge. I wanted to destroy the Fox Zen School because of personal grievances. Hearing this, everyone was silent and sighed inwardly. It was precisely because of this hatred that the two sects had withered and were almost in danger of being destroyed. Seeing that everyone was listening to her, Yan Fang continued, But when I sneaked into the Fox Zen School for the 3rd year, I suddenly found the secret treasure location of the Fox Zen School in Mount Tianlong. Once, I accidentally sneaked in and found the heavenly Jin Dan technique engraved on the rock wall by the mystical silver fox. Everyone was suddenly amazed. Zhou Ping and Zhang Ling looked at each other, and Zhou Ping immediately asked loudly, Shu Yan Fang, have you memorized the heavenly Jin Dan technique? Yan Fang glanced at her quickly, and there was a hint of sarcasm in her eyes. She simply said, No. Zhou Ping was a little annoyed by Yan Fang's gaze. She shouted, How is that possible? A cultivator like you can recite it backwards even if you read it once. Even if you didn't write it down at that time, you could write it down after you go back. How could you not remember it? Yan Fang sneered and said, Fellow Taoists, if the heavenly Jin Dan technique was placed in front of you, would you practice it? The cultivators of the various sects looked at each other and didn't speak. As cultivators, if they saw the heavenly Jin Dan technique in front of them, it was absolutely impossible for them not to practice it. There was no cultivator in the world who could control such a desire. Seeing that everyone was silent, Yan Fang sneered and said, By the way, when we cultivators see such a superior cultivation method, we will definitely find a way to practice it. But once I practiced the heavenly Jin Dan technique, with the ability of that old fox, Lu Yi, how could he not notice it? Therefore, I didn't look at it at all. I only read a few words and then stopped. Hearing this, everyone was suddenly moved. They looked at Yan Fang in shock and thought to themselves, under the temptation of the heavenly Jin Dan technique, Yan Fang can even resist the temptation. It can be seen how strong her will is and how firm her will to take revenge is. Terrible, it's really terrible. Whoever has such an opponent will really have trouble sleeping and eating. At this time, Du Fei said, Jinren Yan, you said that you found a secret cave in the Fox Zen School and the Heavenly Jin Dan technique, but what does this have to do with Jinrenli? What does it have to do with the Fox Zen School? Everyone knows that the mystical silver fox was invincible in the world at that time. Moreover, she happened to live in the period of Mr. Chen Pu, the author of the Heavenly Jin Dan technique. Is it strange that she wanted to get the Heavenly Jin Dan technique and engrave it on the stone wall of the sect? Yan Fang glanced at him and said with a sneer, Jinren Du is really protecting Li Yundong everywhere. Hey! Well, when I saw the Heavenly Jin Dan technique, I was so shocked that I immediately refrained from reading it. But I saw that the last 2 sentences were written by the mystical silver fox on the stone wall. Everyone was curious and hurriedly asked, what is it? Tell me quickly. Yan Fang said loudly, the first sentence is, in the 15th year of Tang Shizong, Mr. Naiwen Chen Pu created the Heavenly Jin Dan technique. This technique seizes the creation of heaven and earth and is an extraordinary secret treasure for cultivation. I yearn for it, but I can't get it. However, I spent all my effort traveling to the divine land. It took me more than 10 years to record it here in the 3rd year of later Liang Qianhua. When everyone heard this, they secretly clicked their tongues in wonder. Some people whispered, it said that there are a few great devils in the history of the cultivation world. The mystical silver fox is one of them. I didn't expect that the lost Heavenly Jin Dan technique would be preserved by her. She is an anomaly, really an anomaly. Li Yundong also nodded slightly. He said to Yan Fang in a deep voice, there is indeed such a sentence, but so what? Does it mean anything? Yan Fang sneered and said, I haven't finished yet. There's another sentence. Li Yundong frowned and asked, what else? I didn't see the following sentence at that time. Yan Fang sneered and said, are you blind? There's another sentence below. Everyone said loudly, Jinren Yan, tell us quickly. What's the other sentence? Yan Fang sneered and said loudly, this sentence is, although I have practiced the Heavenly Jin Dan technique to the 9th level, I have committed a divine retribution because of it. I think I will have to go through the retribution in a few days. If I fail, my soul will be scattered. Therefore, I left the Heavenly Jin Dan technique here. I hope that in the future, the successor of our Fox Zen school can succeed and save my scattered soul from heaven and earth, so that I can reappear in the world. This sentence was tantamount to detonating an atomic bomb on the field. Everyone was so shocked that their faces changed greatly. Everyone stood up suddenly, and the scene suddenly became like a pot of boiling porridge. What? The mystical silver fox wants to reappear in the world? Is there such a conspiracy in the Fox Zen school? Jinrenli, make it clear. Is there such a thing? Even though Li Yundong was very calm, he was still shocked to the spot, but he quickly retorted angrily, it's impossible. There's no such sentence below. If you don't believe me, come back to Mount Tianlong with me now. Yan Fang sneered and said, didn't you see it? I think you're pretending not to see it. Li Yundong, don't quibble. You're Lu Ye's accomplice. He's dead. Now it's your turn to inherit his will. You just want to resurrect the mystical silver fox, don't you? As she spoke, she didn't wait for Li Yundong to catch his breath and said sternly, since ancient times, when the 9-tailed celestial fox has descended into the world, has it not brought great disaster to the world? It was because of Daji's younger sister that there was the chaos of the Shang dynasty. It was because of the mystical silver fox that there was the tragedy of the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms, as well as Buddhism and Taoism, fighting each other. We cultivators sealed the 9-tailed celestial fox, but I didn't expect that you would not change your mind. You still want to release the 9-tailed celestial fox at all costs. Do you want to confuse the world and bring disaster to the common people? Yan Fang's words were too powerful, and the power was no less than that of a dagger throwing a spear. All the cultivators of various sects looked at the people of the Fox Zen school coldly. Yesterday's update. Vote for recommendation previous page next page error report if you like. Please click here to add Keeping a Fox at Home to your bookshelf, so that you can read the latest chapters and updates of Keeping a Fox at Home in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Keeping a Fox at Home, please click here to express your personal views. As she spoke, she closed her eyes, completely ignoring the chaotic situation around her, and began to circulate her qi on her own. Ziyuan and the others tried to mobilize their true qi, but they also found that the true qi in their bodies was as heavy as a 1,000-pound stone. They couldn't mobilize it at all, and even if they did, it was extremely slow, like a worm crawling. Seeing that Li Yundong's eyes were closed and there was no expression on his face, she couldn't help but ask, "Li Yundong, how are you?" After a while, Li Yundong opened his eyes and said in a low voice, "No, my true energy seems to have solidified. I can't mobilize it at all." Zhou Qin, who was standing to one side, couldn't help but say in horror, "Master, I can still mobilize a little true energy. Why can't you mobilize any at all?" Li Yundong's face was cold and he didn't say anything. Ziyuan's heart skipped a beat. She suddenly said, "Could it be that the higher one's cultivation is, the deeper the poison will be? Could it be that this is the immortal fall?" "The immortal fall? What is this?" Zhou Qin, Su Chan, and the others asked in surprise. Ziyuan looked at Yan Feng in shock and said, "Isn't the immortal fall already lost? How did she get it again?" "This kind of poison doesn't cause any harm when it enters the body, but it will slow down the blood flow and stagnate the aura of the whole body. True energy is driven by qi and blood. If qi and blood are slow, true energy will be activated slowly. Therefore, this kind of poison is the great nemesis of cultivators. The higher the cultivation of a person, the deeper the poison will be." Ruan Hongling said in surprise, "Could it be that the poison is in the tea?" Zhou Qin immediately said, "I didn't drink the tea, but I was also poisoned." Su Chan's heart skipped a beat. She said loudly, "I know." The little girl pointed to the incense burner on the field and said, "Is it this one?" At this time, most of the people also came to their senses. They hadn't expected that so many cultivators here would be defeated by a little girl like Song Yuqiao. Everyone looked at Song Yuqiao angrily and said, "Little girl, did you order the immortal fall?" Song Yuqiao was so scared by the angry gazes of so many cultivators that she trembled all over. She hid behind Yan Feng with the pipa in her arms, not daring to show her head or speak. Wang Jinyuan laughed angrily and said, "I didn't expect it, I really didn't expect it. Yan Feng, you actually instigated my disciple to rebel. Good, that's really good." Yan Feng sneered and said, "Your disciple? Ha ha ha, Xiao Qiao has been my disciple since she was 5 years old, but she's not famous yet." Wang Jinyuan was shocked. "Have you been planning this since then?" Yan Feng sneered and said, "I just arranged it casually. I didn't expect that it would lead to such a result." It's really God's will." Wang Jinyuan laughed angrily and said, "Good method, really good method. However, this is a grudge between you and the Fox Zen School. Why do you want us to get involved?" Yan Feng laughed and said, "If it weren't for this, how could we have schemed against these evildoers of the Fox Zen School?" When everyone heard this, they all started cursing. For a moment, there was a lot of dirty words in the field. However, Yan Feng turned a deaf ear to them. She snorted and said, "If the ruler is not secretive, he will lose his subject. If the subject is not secretive, he will lose his own life. If he is not secretive, he will cause harm. I think you'd better save some strength. You should know that the more you use your strength, the more effective the immortal fall will be. Be careful not to lose your cultivation after the effect of the medicine is gone. If that happens, don't blame me." When everyone heard this, they became even angrier, but no one dared to speak loudly. They all closed their mouths and began to concentrate on mobilizing their Jinqi. Seeing that everyone had quieted down, Yan Feng said to Li Yundong and the others, "Li Yundong, now you are like a turtle in a jar. If you have any last words, just say them quickly." Su Chan, Zhou Qin, and the others were all furious. They glared at Yan Fang, but Li Yundong's face was calm. He said coldly, "How is Ao Wushuang?" Yan Fang laughed and said, "You can't even protect yourself. Why are you still thinking about that B*TCHAO Wushuang?" Li Yundong didn't get angry. He fixed his eyes on Yan Fang and said, "I just want to know what you did to her." Yan Fang snorted. With a flick of her wrist, she took out a small purple bell from her bosom. At a glance, Li Yunyang saw that the small bell was about the size of a palm. It was purple and carved with exquisite patterns. It was the emperor's clock. Yan Fang sneered and said, "Ao Wushuang is in it. Do you want to save her?" Li Yundong nodded and said, "Since the emperor's clock is with you, I'm relieved." Yan Fang was stunned. She said with some vigilance, "What do you want to do?" As soon as she finished speaking, Li Yundong suddenly opened his eyes, and his eyes shone brightly. His body was like a fierce tiger, and he rushed toward Yan Fang like lightning. Yan Fang suddenly turned pale with horror. She exclaimed, "Impossible. How can you still use qi?" As she spoke, she subconsciously blocked with her palms in front of her. The palms of the two of them collided with a loud bang. Yan Fang's body trembled violently, as if she had been hit by an electric current. Li Yundong quickly lowered his body and poked at Yan Fang's Qihai acupoint with his fingers. Yan Fang had suffered losses in Li Yundong's hands one after another before, and her fear of him had already gone deep into her subconscious. She was hit by Li Yundong's palm force, and her whole body was numb. For a moment, her reaction was a little slow, and Li Yundong poked the Qihai acupoint in her lower abdomen. The Qihai acupoint was a major acupoint of the Ren meridian of the human body. Once it was poked, the whole body would be numb and unable to exert any strength. Yan Fang immediately fell to the ground. She looked at Li Yundong in shock and anger and said, "Impossible, how can you still move?" At this time, Li Yundong was also a little out of breath. His face was pale, but he just stared at Yan Fang and didn't say anything. Seeing his appearance, Yan Fang suddenly had an idea. She laughed and said, "You really deserve it. You can't live. You're courting death. After being hit by my immortal fall, you still tried to use qi to struggle. Now look. You found that you can't move your whole body, right?" A layer of sweat appeared on Li Yundong's forehead. He said coldly, "Can you move?" Yan Fang sneered and said, "Humph, we're all the same, so there's no need to criticize each other. However, don't forget that I still have my disciple here." As she said this, she shouted to Song Yuqiao behind her, "Xiao Qiao, go up and kill this evil man." Zhou Qin and Su Chan were so shocked that they wanted to grit their teeth and stand up, especially Zhou Qin. Many of her bones were broken. As soon as she was about to move, the pain made her break out in a cold sweat. She snorted and almost collapsed on the spot. Zi Yuan was quick to react. She immediately grabbed Su Chan and Zhou Qin and said in a low voice, "Don't do anything stupid. Don't move after being hit by the immortal fall. After the effect of the drug passes, you will recover on your own. If you force yourself to move, you will be like Li Yundong now. On the contrary, you won't be able to move at all. Moreover, the recovery time will be greatly extended." Zhou Qin didn't say anything. She gritted her teeth, as if she was enduring the severe pain. Su Chan's face was full of shock and anger. She shouted, "Should I just watch Yundong be killed?" Zi Yuan smiled slightly and said, "Don't be silly. Li Yundong has been preparing for this day for a long time." However, he didn't expect that Yan Fang would use such a powerful poison as the immortal fall. "He will be fine. Don't worry." Su Chan stared at her in surprise and doubt. What? Did Yundong know that Zhuang Yiting Shibua was Yan Fang? Zi Yuan nodded gently. That's right. Su Chan and the others were shocked. They couldn't help but look at the field. Zi Yuan sighed softly. It's just that I really didn't expect the Taoist assembly to turn out like this. Too many accidents have happened together. The situation is already chaotic and out of control. At this time, the cultivators of the various sects on the sidelines were all closing their eyes to circulate their qi. They could hear everything clearly, but none of them were in the mood to help either side. What if their cultivation quotient regressed greatly in the future if they moved? It was a dog-eat-dog situation on both sides. They could just watch the fire from the other side. They wouldn't do such a thing that would harm themselves and benefit others. After Yan Fang shouted at Song Yuqiao, she didn't see any movement behind her. She resisted the severe pain in her qi and turned her head to look, only to see Song Yuqiao standing there trembling all over, looking at Li Yundong with fear in her eyes. She was too timid to go forward. Yan Fang suddenly flew into a rage and scolded her, "Are you deaf? Go and kill this evil man." See. Chapter 5:11. When Song Yuqiao heard Yan Fang's roar, she was so shocked that her whole body trembled. Her eyelids kept twitching, and her long eyelashes trembled gently. Her eyes were full of fear. She was weak and introverted. Usually, it would take her a long time to step on an ant. Now she was asked to kill someone, which really scared her soul out of her body. What's more, the person she was going to kill was Li Yundong, who had shown great power to drive the Japanese away. Song Yuqiao's teeth were chattering. She looked at Li Yundong. Not to mention whether she was willing or not, and not to mention whether Li Yundong had the ability to resist, just thinking about Li Yundong's awe-inspiring power made her legs weak and her whole body weak. Go to the internet. The poor little girl said in a trembling voice, "Master, I don't dare." Yan Fang was so angry that she raised her eyebrows and said, "You be ****, I've taught you for so long. Why wouldn't you dare?" Song Yuqiao's eyes were filled with tears of shock and fear. She said in a trembling voice, "But I just don't dare. Master, this is a human being. How can you ask me to kill him?" Only then did Yan Fang remember that the nominal disciple she had accepted was very weak. It was too much to ask her to kill someone. She suppressed her anger and said softly, "Silly disciple, this person is a great villain. If you kill him, you can save many people, including you and your master. You are doing justice on behalf of heaven. Not only will everyone in the world not blame you, but they will also thank you." Song Yuqiao's parents had died when she was a child, and she had been adopted by Yan Fang as a disciple since she was a child. To her, Yan Fang was like a parent, but also like a master. Therefore, Yan Fang's words were extremely heavy and could be said to be as heavy as a mountain. After hearing this, she couldn't help but feel a little braver. She asked timidly, "Is it true, master?" Seeing that Song Yuqiao was moved, Yan Fang was overjoyed and continued to say softly, "Of course it's true. When have I ever lied to you? After you kill this person, I'll take you far away to a place where no one can find you. We'll live happily ever after, okay?" Song Yuqiao's face was full of surprise. She asked tentatively, "Master, are you serious? You won't you abandon me again?" Yan Fang sighed softly and said, "Silly girl, how can I bear to leave you behind? Think about it, if the man you love the most was snatched away by someone else, would you want to take revenge? If it were you and you discovered such a shocking conspiracy, would you want to stop them and save the world?" Song Yuqiao thought very seriously. She bit her red lips hard with her snow-white teeth, and there seemed to be a battle in her mind. Su Chan, Ziyuan, Zhou Qin, and the others all looked at Song Yuqiao nervously, waiting for this weak little girl to make a decision. Song Yuqiao stared at Yan Fang closely. She hesitated for a long time, then suddenly gritted her teeth. She took the golden hairpin from her hair, held it tightly with both hands, and walked toward Li Yunyang, trembling all over. Su Chan, Ziyuan, and Zhou Qin exclaimed at the same time, "Stop. No. How dare you? The little foxes also exclaimed at the same time, "Don't kill him. Leader is the best person in the world. Don't kill him. If you want to kill someone, kill us." When Song Yuqiao heard their shouts, she couldn't help but tremble and stop again. She looked at Su Chan and the others, only to see that they were looking at her with frightened and pleading eyes, as if they couldn't wait to die for Li Yunyang. Song Yuqiao hesitated for a moment. As soon as she hesitated, Yan Feng, who was behind her, immediately said loudly, "What are you hesitating for? These are all vixens in the world. They can do nothing but bring disaster to the world. Do you want to see the world in chaos? Do you want to be the culprit who helps the evildoer? In the future, when the world is in chaos and the people suffer, you will be the initiator." Song Yuqiao's body trembled. She gritted her teeth, forcibly looked away, and walked toward Li Yunyang. Song Yuqiao walked up to Li Yunyang. She lowered her head and said in a sobbing tone, Don't blame me. I didn't want to." As she said this, she raised the golden hairpin in her hand high. For a moment, the people who had been closing their eyes to control their qi couldn't help opening their eyes. They widened their eyes and couldn't believe that Li Yunyang, who could even be dispelled by Mahamayuri, was going to die in the hands of such a weak girl. Everyone saw that the golden hairpin was long, thin, and extremely sharp. The sharp thorns reflected dazzling light in the sunlight shining in from outside the building, dazzling everyone's eyes for a moment. Song Yuqiao held the golden hairpin trembling all over and was about to push it forward, but at this time, she couldn't help but look at Li Yunyang. She saw that Li Yunyang was staring at her. Not only was there no hatred or anger in his eyes, but they were very gentle and full of sympathy. This kind of gaze was like warm seawater, wrapping Song Yuqiao tightly, making her involuntarily think, why doesn't he hate me? Why is he looking at me like this? Song Yuqiao said in panic, "Why are you looking at me?" Li Yunyang smiled slightly, sighed, and said, "If you don't look at me, how do you know I'm looking at you?" Song Yuqiao immediately looked away in horror. "I'm not looking at you. Don't look at me." Li Yunyang smiled and said, "What you were looking at just now was not me, but your heart. Even if you look away, it's useless, because you can't face your own heart. You don't believe that I'm a bad person at all, do you?" This sentence hit Song Yuqiao like a bolt of lightning. She trembled all over and couldn't help opening her mouth wide. A voice in her heart shouted loudly, he would rather withdraw from the Taoist assembly himself than take the immortal pen and bear the responsibility for his disciple. He was forced by everyone to lose the qualification to participate in the competition, but he didn't say a word of evil. Instead, he turned the tide at the critical moment. Could such a responsible and courageous man be a bad person? Could a person with such a gentle and kind gaze be a bad person? Song Yuqiao stood there like a statue. Although Yan Feng, who was behind her, couldn't see her expression, her heart suddenly skipped a beat. She couldn't help saying loudly, "Xiao Qiao, don't listen to his evil words. This person is best at bewitching people. You have to control yourself, Xiao Qiao. There are so many people waiting for you to save them." Song Yuqiao couldn't help looking back at Yan Feng, and then at Li Yunyang. Suddenly, the golden hairpin in her hand fell to the ground with a clang. She covered her face with both hands and cried, "Master, I can't do it. I really can't do it. I'm sorry." As she said this, she quickly ran downstairs. Yan Feng was furious and shouted, "Useless thing, come back. Come back quickly." But no matter how she shouted, Song Yuqiao didn't look back. She sobbed all the way and gradually went away. Only Yan Feng's angry roar echoed in the small building. Only then did Su Chan and the others relax and breathe a sigh of relief. Ruan Hongling sneered and said, "Humph, let's see what other tricks Yan Feng has up her sleeve." After Zi Yuan was relieved, she closed her eyes and said in a deep voice, "Don't talk. Concentrate on running your qi." Ruan Hongling glanced around and saw that everyone upstairs had closed their eyes and were quietly running their qi. At this time, Whoever could recover first would be the strongest master on the scene and would be able to control the power of life and death. Even Yan Fang suppressed her anger and stopped talking. She closed her eyes and concentrated on running her qi. Ruan Hongling's heart skipped a beat. She whispered to Ziyuan, Shiji Ziyuan, what if someone comes at this time? Ziyuan didn't even open her eyes. She said, the immortal fall in this incense burner is still burning. As long as you get close to it and smell it, your cultivation will drop to the lowest point. You won't be able to run your qi, and you'll be even worse than an ordinary person who has no strength to truss a chicken. However, if an ordinary person comes at this time, it will be terrible, because ordinary people will not be affected by the immortal fall. Hearing this, Ruan Hongling immediately closed her eyes. She thought to herself, if an ordinary person came and killed everyone here with a steel knife, it would be the most ridiculous thing in the world. I can't die in the hands of an ordinary person. At this time, everyone upstairs was concentrating on running their qi. For a moment, the atmosphere was stagnant and quiet. The originally quiet and elegant building was now as quiet as a cemetery, which made people's hair stand on end. All the cultivators in the building were motionless like stone statues. The air around them seemed to have frozen. Only the first-grade immortal incense in the incense burner was slowly burning, emitting wisps of faint smoke that spread out in all directions. Time passed bit by bit, and the sky slowly changed from a golden crow hanging high in the sky to a jade rabbit rising. The sky gradually darkened. In the distance of the garden building, a young man hiding in the corner of a dark alley couldn't help but say to an old man beside him, Master Purin, it's almost dark. How long do we have to wait? Master Purin of Shiyuan Temple was dressed in ordinary clothes. He lowered his eyes, as if he was standing in meditation. He said softly, Feikong, why are you in such a hurry? The devil hasn't made a move yet, so naturally, we can't. Feikong looked a little anxious. But how long do we have to wait? Purin smiled slightly, opened his eyes, and said, when the devil can't help but make a move, we will naturally activate the Bafang demon subduing formation and subdue him. Feikong took a deep breath and said, what if he doesn't make a move? Purin smiled, closed his eyes again, put his palms together, and chanted the name of Buddha. Amitba, if he doesn't make a move today, he will sooner or later. Feikong had no choice but to suppress his temper again, put his palms together, and silently recited the scripture. After an unknown period of time, the immortal fall in the incense burner on the small building suddenly dimmed. This peerless poisonous smoke, which had made many cultivators surrender, was finally exhausted. Just as the last wisp of fragrance gradually dissipated in the air, two figures suddenly floated into the small building. The two of them stood side by side. Their figures were graceful under the moonlight, but their faces could not be seen clearly. The taller one quickly glanced around the small building, smiled slightly, and said faintly, Yan Fang, you didn't expect this day to come, did you? The other one gnashed her teeth and sneered. Shimmy, why are you talking to her? Hurry up and kill her. When Yan Fang heard this voice, she immediately opened her eyes. She took a closer look and was shocked. It's you? Chapter 5:12. At this time, there were two women standing in the field. One was petite but graceful. It was Lu Yuehong of the Fox Zen School. Next to her stood a charming and seductive woman. It was Chao Yi, who had disappeared before. Yan Fang suddenly saw the two of them and was shocked. She asked in surprise, why are you two here? But she quickly reacted. She gritted her teeth and looked at Li Yundong. So you already knew? Li Yundong's face was expressionless. He didn't even open his eyes and didn't speak. Go to see the net. Lu Yuehong, who was standing on the field with a frosty expression, said, that's right. Leader has known for a long time. Yan Fang said loudly, that's impossible. When did you know that I had possessed Zhuang Yiting? Lu Yuehong snorted and said, you pretended very well, but the net of heaven has long arms. Yan Fang sneered and said, how could the two of you and Li Yundong, who is so careless, notice it? As she said this, she suddenly turned her head and glared at Zi Yuan, saying angrily, you must have noticed it, didn't you? At this time, Zi Yuan also opened her eyes. She nodded slightly and said, yes, I noticed it, but Li Yundong was sure of it. Yan Fang shouted angrily, that's impossible. Where did I make a mistake? Zi Yuan said unhurriedly, since the last time we went to the buffet, Li Yundong asked us to buy clothes, and you took the opportunity to show up, I had some doubts. Because at that time, your yang spirit was extremely strong. Unless you had a host, it was impossible for your cultivation to not have regressed at all. So at that time, I immediately went to the place where the people of the Fox Zen school were changing clothes. At that time, everyone was outside, and only you and Chao Yi were in the changing room. At this time, I had already targeted the two of you. Yan Fang stared at Zi Yuan and sneered, her eyes full of sarcasm. Zi Yuan quickly said, of course, I also guessed that you might have shown up on purpose to arouse our suspicion and make the Fox Zen school kill each other, right? Yan Fang's expression changed. She snorted and said nothing. Zi Yuan knew that she had guessed correctly, so she said, but what I don't understand is that you hid very well after that, until one day, you suddenly appeared and led us to Mount Gazao. You wanted to expose Li Yundong in front of everyone and take his life. Why did you do that? Yan Fang stared at Zi Yuan for a long time. Suddenly, she laughed and said, finally, there's something you don't know, Zi Yuan? This is truly shocking and lamentable. In the face of Yan Fang's sarcasm, Zi Yuan didn't get angry. She just smiled faintly and said, I was born on a cliff, and my knowledge is boundless. It's normal for me to have things I don't know. What's so strange about it? Martial uncle, don't you always boast of your meticulous schemes? Don't you want to know when Li Yundong realized that Zhuang Yiting was you? Yan Fang's expression changed greatly. She immediately asked, when did he notice it? Zi Yuan smiled and said, when Desanxian was established, President Chao came to congratulate you. When you first saw her, you were extremely shocked. Later, President Chao left Desanxian and told him where she was going. That night, she was almost killed, and only we knew where she lived. So the murderer could only be among us. At that time, Li Yundong went to the scene of the murder and accidentally found some evidence at the scene. This evidence is exactly where you were smart all your life, but you were muddle-headed for a moment. Yan Fang said with a sullen face, what evidence? Zi Yuan snorted and said, although there was not much blood left at the scene, and it was the same as the bloody clothes that Li Yundong asked Su Chan to find in Chao Yi's room, Li Yundong used a method to find two kinds of blood on the clothes and at the scene of the murder at the same time. One was Chao Yi's, and the other was yours. Yan Fang said in surprise, how is that possible? How did you know? Zi Yuan looked at Yan Fang sympathetically. She sighed slightly and said, Sherbua, you are really smart all your life, but you are muddle-headed for a moment. Have you forgotten that in modern society, there is a kind of science called blood testing and DNA testing? Yan Fang suddenly trembled all over. Her mouth was slightly open, and her face was full of disbelief. It seemed that she hadn't expected that she would be so careless that she would make a mistake in this simplest link. Zi Yuan sighed and said, when the police sent the report the next day, Li Yundong knew that you and Chao Yi had gone to President Chao's residence at the same time, but you claimed that you hadn't gone out. Isn't that a confession? You worked so hard to frame Chao Yi, but you didn't expect to be killed because of this, did you? Yan Fang's expression changed a few times. She gritted her teeth and said, no wonder Li Yundong appeared there again. Humph. She looked at Chao Yi unwillingly and sneered. You must be very proud now, right? Chao Yi stared at Yan Fang coldly and said noncommittally, you are about to die. What else do you want to say? Lu Yuehong, who was standing to one side, glared at Yan Fang and said sternly, Shimmy, what else is there to say to this person? How many people has she harmed? From eldest Shiji Mo Ashi to Yiyu, and then to Zhuang Yiting? Today, I will make you pay with your blood. After that, Lu Yuehong let out a shrill roar and pounced on Yan Fang angrily. Her fingers were like hooks, as if she wanted to dig out Yan Fang's heart with one hand. But as soon as Lu Yuehong's hand touched Yan Fang's body, Yan Fang suddenly moved. She clasped Lu Yuehong's arm with both hands and twisted it hard. Then she kicked Lu Yuehong's body heavily with her leg. Lu Yuehong hadn't expected that Yan Fang would still be able to move. She suddenly screamed, and the bones in her arm were broken. Her body flew out like a sandbag. Everyone was shocked by this turn of events. They did not expect Yan Fang to be the first to recover. The expressions of Su Chan, Zhou Qin, and the others changed dramatically, and Zi Yuan's face suddenly became very ugly. Yan Fang laughed wildly and said, "You didn't expect this, did you?" As she said this, she looked at Li Yundong with a murderous look in her eyes. Yan Fang knew that as long as she killed him, the Fox Zen school would collapse without a fight. As soon as Chao Yi saw this, she immediately said in a cold voice, "If you want to kill the leader, you have to get through me first." Yan Fang glared at Chao Yi fiercely. "You always go against me. Humph, do you think you're a good person? Just in time, I'll settle old and new grudges with you together." After that, she let out a shrill scream and was about to pounce on him. Unexpectedly, at this moment, Li Yundong suddenly opened his eyes, and an extremely sharp gaze shot toward Yan Fang like a sharp arrow. Yan Fang's heart suddenly trembled. She thought to herself, "Damn it, has this little thief recovered?" Her subconscious fear of Li Yundong was extremely deep, so she immediately gave up the idea of going forward. Yan Fang's mind raced like lightning. She soon thought, even if this evil thief has recovered, it doesn't matter. As long as I grab the immortal pen, even if he has great ability, he can't do anything to me. Thinking of this, Yan Fang suddenly stopped moving forward, twisted her body, and pounced on Wang Jinyuan. At this time, Wang Jinyuan had been poisoned by the fragrance of the immortal fall, so he was defenseless. He could only watch helplessly as Yan Fang approached him and slapped him in the chest. Wang Jinyuan's mind was like lightning, and he was cunning. He immediately understood what Yan Fang meant, so he immediately gathered all the strength in his body and threw the immortal pen toward the field. Then he ran away like a wisp of smoke. Yan Fang sneered in her heart. Without looking at Wang Jinyuan, she turned her head to grab the immortal pen. However, she saw the immortal pen roll in the air and fall to the ground with a clatter. A girl bent down and reached out to pick up the pen. The girl was tall and dressed fashionably and beautifully. Who else could it be but Ding Nan? Yan Fang was shocked. She hadn't expected that someone would have recovered. She immediately shouted with a ferocious face, "Put down the immortal pen." Ding Nan's cultivation was later than Zhou Qin's, and she didn't have the help of Renuan Jindan. In particular, she hadn't built the Zhuji phase and hadn't even stepped into the threshold of cultivation, so her cultivation was the lowest here. However, the power of the immortal fall was that the higher one's cultivation was, the deeper the poison would be. On the contrary, it would be easier for those with lower cultivation to recover. When Ding Nan saw the immortal pen flying toward her, she subconsciously picked it up, but it immediately attracted Yan Fang's killing intent. For a moment, she was a little afraid and hesitated. Should she throw the immortal pen out or keep it? Unexpectedly, Zheng Yuan suddenly opened his eyes and shouted, "Pinger, run." Without thinking, Ding Nan subconsciously turned around and ran. Yan Fang was extremely angry and shouted, "Stop." She moved like lightning and caught up with Ding Nan in the blink of an eye. Like a tiger catching a sheep, she grabbed Ding Nan's neck with one hand. At this time, only Yan Fang, Ding Nan, and Chao Yi, who was guarding Li Yundong, could move. At this time, Chao Yi was focused on Li Yundong. As long as Li Yundong was fine, even if everyone around her died, her expression would not change. Seeing that Yan Fang was about to grab Ding Nan, Jing Yuan suddenly took out a Rui jade from his arms. He quickly bit his index finger and smeared his blood on the handle of the Rui jade. Then, he shouted, "Yan Fang." As soon as the Rui jade was stained with blood, a lot of black qi immediately emerged, becoming terrifying and ferocious. An invisible black mist instantly rushed toward Yan Fang's body. When Yan Fang heard Jing Yuan's shout, she immediately felt her heart beat violently, as if someone was pinching it. She could hardly breathe and lost all her strength. For a moment, Yan Fang lost control of her body and fell to the ground in the blink of an eye. However, she soon regained her strength and got up. She looked at Jing Yuan in shock and anger and shouted, "What kind of powerful magical weapon is this?" Cultivators often fought with lightning and thunder, and it happened in the blink of an eye. At this moment, Yan Fang almost lost all control of her body. It was incredible that a cultivator like her would fall to the ground. If it weren't for the fact that Jing Yuan had not fully recovered at this time and could only barely control his qi, Yan Fang would have been dead by now. In Yan Fang's opinion, the powerful magical weapon in Jing Yuan's hand was simply sinister and vicious. If caught off guard, even a Jinxian would suffer a big setback and might even be doomed eternally. After Jing Yuan shouted, his face suddenly turned pale, and a layer of sweat appeared on his forehead. He turned to Ding Nan and said, "Pinger, you go first. I'll hold her back." At this time, Ding Nan was already standing at the railing on the second floor, staring at everyone present in horror and vigilance. As long as there was the slightest movement, she would immediately jump over the railing and escape. However, the scheming Ding Nan also knew that she hadn't even reached the Zhuji phase. Even if she could escape, she wouldn't be able to get far. Holding an immortal pen was like holding a gold ingot and walking in a busy city. She would definitely be killed. Therefore, she didn't rush to escape. Instead, she pretended to be concerned and said loudly to Jing Yuan, "Master, if you don't go, I won't go either." Jing Yuan was greatly moved, and the last trace of suspicion he had for Ding Nan disappeared. He took a deep breath, and his snow-white face suddenly flushed. He sneered at Yan Fang and said, "Jinren Yan, I'm going to take this immortal pen today. If you don't want to die, come up." I'm sorry, I've been busy outside for a whole day, and I've just entered the house. Chapter 513. Yan Fang hadn't expected that Jing Yuan would suddenly intervene regardless of everything. She immediately sneered and said, "Jing Yuan, your powerful magical weapon is indeed powerful, but do you think you can stop me like this?" As she said this, Yan Fang suddenly took out a talisman and poured all her Jinqi into it. The talisman immediately burned and instantly turned into a black shadow that pounced on Ding Nan. Go to CNET. 7 KOM. Jing Yuan's face changed. He knew that this was the Liujia Master Talisman, and this black shadow was transformed from a resentful spirit. His powerful magical weapon could be used to deal with living people, but it couldn't deal with such a resentful spirit. His face changed, and his eyes turned. He immediately shouted at Yan Fang again, "Yan Fang." As soon as Yan Fang was called by Jing Yuan, she immediately lost control of her body and fell to the ground with a plop. She flew into a rage out of humiliation and let out a shrill roar. The black shadow she had sent out immediately rushed toward Ding Nan more fiercely. Ding Nan was so shocked that her eyes suddenly widened. Just as she was about to turn around and run away, she suddenly heard Zhou Qin shout, "Ding Nan, do you want to die? Throw away the immortal pen." Ding Nan's body trembled. Zhou Qin had left a deep impression in her heart for a long time, so she subconsciously threw the immortal pen in her hand toward the field. As soon as she threw it out, Yan Fang immediately let out another shrill roar. As soon as the black shadow rushed to Ding Nan, it suddenly turned around and pounced on the immortal pen. Ding Nan only felt a bone-chilling yin qi pass in front of her, and all her hair stood on end in an instant. She knew that she had just taken a turn at the gate of hell. If it hadn't been for Zhou Qin's reminder, she would have been dead by now. But before Ding Nan could think deeply, she saw the situation suddenly change. After the immortal pen was thrown out by her, it landed in front of a Taoist priest of the Qingwei sect. The Taoist priest's eyes suddenly lit up. He immediately picked up the immortal pen with the tip of his foot, and then immediately pinched his fingers together. He slapped at the Liujiayin master talisman that Yan Fang had released and shouted, "Thunder!" With a rumble, a bolt of lightning shot out from his hand and turned the resentful ghost into a cloud of green smoke. But before he could be happy for long, someone behind him slapped him hard on the back, causing him to spit out a mouthful of blood, and the immortal pen in his hand fell to the ground. The man turned his head and saw that it was a Taoist priest of the Jinshan sect. He was holding the immortal pen in one hand, and he didn't even have time to withdraw his other hand from his back. He laughed wildly and said, "Immortal pen. I got the immortal pen." Jing Yuan's heart skipped a beat. He also knew that Yan Fang was an extreme person. Once she became enemies, it would definitely be a terrible thing that would not end until she died. If she really did what she said, it would really make people restless. Since ancient times, there had only been one who could be a thief for 1,000 days. How could one guard against a thief for 1,000 days? Jing Yuan's heart was filled with evil thoughts. He wanted to kill Yan Fang, but just as he was about to mobilize his Jinqi, he suddenly felt short of breath and couldn't breathe. A strange red color appeared on his face, and his breathing became extremely rapid. He coughed violently twice and even coughed up blood. Yan Fang laughed and said, "You brought this on yourself. You forced yourself to control your qi. Now you regret it. Go to hell." After that, she moved her body and was about to step forward. But as soon as she finished speaking, she heard a young man shout coldly, "Yan Fang, you can't even protect yourself. You'd better take care of yourself." When Yan Fang heard this voice, her whole body suddenly trembled. She turned her head and saw Li Yundong looking at her with a sneer on his face, slowly walking toward her step by step. This time, Yan Fang was almost scared out of her wits, and she regretted it so much that her intestines almost turned green. In an instant, Yan Fang realized that Li Yundong had not fully recovered just now. He had just stared at her with his eyes and dispersed her killing intent, making her think that Li Yundong had already had room to fight back. Therefore, she had some concerns in her heart and didn't dare to make a move against him. But now, Li Yundong had completely recovered. When this evil thief recovered, how could she be his match? She could only hate herself for not having a firm will at the beginning and not decisively attacking Li Yundong. Otherwise, how could she have ended up like this? Yan Fang's thoughts raced like lightning. She let out a shrill scream of unwillingness. Her face became extremely ferocious and terrifying, and her black hair stood on end. She said sternly, "Li Yundong, I'm not done with you." After that, her yang spirit went out of her body in an instant. Her ferocious and mournful face also froze, and her body fell to the ground like a stone. Her yang spirit turned into a blue light and quickly escaped from the small building. Li Yundong's eyes widened and he shouted, "Where are you going?" He immediately sent his yang spirit out of his body and chased after her with the burning thumb pot. In this small building, Li Yundong and Yan Fang, who had recovered the fastest, left in the blink of an eye. For a moment, everyone's eyes were fixed on Jing Yuan, who was holding the immortal pen. Before long, they shouted in unison and rushed toward Jing Yuan like crazy. Jing Yuan's face changed greatly. He gritted his teeth, pointed to the few people at the front, and shouted their names repeatedly. Suddenly, these people trembled all over. Jing Yuan's powerful magical weapon could seize souls. When he shouted the other party's name, the ghost in the jade rui would instantly rush into the other party's body and hook their souls. If the other party's cultivation was profound and the Niden was vigorous and condensed, then the ghost could not hook the other party's soul. It could only temporarily cause the other party's qi and blood to stagnate, thus making the other party fall and lose the ability to resist. If this person's foundation was weak, then the 3 souls and 7 spirits would immediately be hooked out of the body by the ghost and killed by Zheng Yuan's powerful magical weapon in the blink of an eye. After Zheng Yuan shouted the names of these people, they fell to the ground like wooden stakes. Their faces turned pale, and in the blink of an eye, they were no longer alive. A mass of colorful qi was pulled out of the 7 orifices of the people who had fallen to the ground by a mass of black qi, and then it rushed toward Zheng Yuan's jade rui. As soon as the 3 souls and 7 spirits of these people were hooked back to the jade rui, the black qi all over its body immediately surged, as if it had swallowed the 3 souls and 7 spirits of these people, and its power had greatly increased. When everyone saw this, they were all shocked. Someone pointed at Zheng Yuan in horror and scolded him sternly. "Zheng Yuan, how dare you refine such a sinister and vicious powerful magical weapon in private? Aren't you afraid of retribution? Zheng Yuan, are you looking for death? How dare you use such a sinister and inferior powerful magical weapon? Aren't you afraid of divine retribution? How dare you kill my fellow disciples? Zheng Yuan, the Jinshan sect will not let you off." Zhou Qin also looked at the powerful magical weapon in Zheng Yuan's hand in horror and said in fear, "What kind of powerful magical weapon is this? Is it so powerful? He died as soon as I shouted his name." Zi Yuan also looked at Zheng Yuan in horror. There was fear in her eyes as she said, "Could this be the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade? Wasn't this powerful magical weapon destroyed during the Jingde period of the Ming dynasty? How could it have been refined again?" Su Chan also looked at Zheng Yuan in horror. She was afraid that if he turned his head and shouted her name, she would die. She said in a trembling voice, "How could there be such an evil powerful magical weapon in the world? If it were to fall into the hands of an evil person, he could call out the name of the person within a range of 50 feet to reap their soul. The magic treasure would become stronger and stronger, and one day, the power of the magic treasure would surpass the power of the strongest person in the world of cultivation. At that time, the person holding the magic treasure would die if he called out the name of the person. Who can be his opponent?" Ruan Hongling also looked at Zheng Yuan in horror. She said, "Fortunately, Zheng Yuan was poisoned by the immortal fall at this time. Otherwise, the consequences would have been unimaginable. If he hadn't been poisoned, I'm afraid that even if Taoist Master Zhang of the Juni school came in person, he wouldn't have dared to fight him face to face. He could only retreat and run away." This powerful magical weapon was said to be invincible within 50 feet during the Jingde period. At that time, I thought it was just bragging, but now I see that it's really terrifying. The women were frightened by Zheng Yuan's powerful magical weapon, and so were the cultivators of the other sections. Even Zhang Ling, who had always been hot-tempered and hated evil, suddenly opened her eyes and looked at Zheng Yuan in horror and anger. She didn't dare to say anything, for fear that Zheng Yuan would shout her name in anger. Zheng Yuan saw that everyone was glaring at him, but most of them didn't dare to say anything. No one dared to come forward again. Zheng Yuan laughed wildly. He waved his sleeve, grabbed the immortal pen in one hand, and quickly rushed to Ding Nan. He shouted, "Let's go." Then he turned into a cloud of black smoke and left the small building in the blink of an eye. Zheng Yuan took Ding Nan and fled, and no one dared to chase after him. After flying for a long time, he finally returned to his cave in Mount Wuhua. As soon as he landed, he suddenly knelt on the ground and spat out a mouthful of blood. Ding Nan was shocked and hurriedly asked, "Master, what's wrong with you?" Zheng Yuan's face was as white as a sheet. He smiled bitterly, raised his trembling hand, and said to Ding Nan, "Quick, go and get the 9-turn spirit restoring pill. It's in the 7th purple bottle in the 3rd shelf of the closet." After that, he spat out another mouthful of blood. Ding Nan knew that this was the result of Zheng Yuan's forced qi flow just now. She immediately got up and hurriedly found the pill. But when she walked over to Zheng Yuan, she saw the old man lying on the ground and spitting out blood with his back facing her defenselessly. Ding Nan's heart suddenly skipped a beat, and a bold idea suddenly came to her mind. Now he has the immortal pen and the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade, and I have the threaded hairpin of soul traversing. As long as I kill this lecherous old man, with these 3 powerful magical weapons in hand, won't I be invincible in the world? Will Li Yundong still look at me in the eye? At the thought of this, Ding Nan's heart suddenly beat violently. Chapter 514. As soon as this thought came to Ding Nan's mind, her heart suddenly pounded as if it was going to jump out of her throat in the next second. Go to the internet. Desire was like a devil. Once it came, it was difficult to leave. In particular, Ding Nan gritted her teeth and clenched her fists when she saw Zheng Yuan weakly turning his back to her and constantly coughing up blood. Her hand slowly touched the threaded hairpin of soul traversal hidden at her waist. But when she was about to touch the threaded hairpin of soul traversal, she suddenly noticed that although Zheng Yuan had his back to her, one of his hands was still tightly grasping the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade. Ding Nan's heart suddenly skipped a beat. She thought, no, this old lecher has always been scheming and has always been on guard against me. Moreover, he always has a backup plan. If I fail to kill him, I'll be digging my own grave. What's more, even if I kill him now, I haven't reached the Zhuji phase and can't use these 3 powerful magical weapons. In the end, the other people of the Yin-Yang sect may take advantage of the situation. No, now is not the time to kill this old lecher. In the blink of an eye, Ding Nan's mind raced. Such intense psychological activity only lasted for a moment. Her hand quickly left the threaded hairpin of soul traversal, bent down to help Zheng Yuan up, poured the medicine into her palm, and fed it to him. After eating the 9-turn spirit restoration pill, Zheng Yuan circulated his qi for a while, and a trace of normal color returned to his face. He took a long breath, looked at Ding Nan meaningfully, and said, Pinger, if you had any bad intentions just now, I'm afraid you wouldn't be alive now. Ding Nan's heart suddenly trembled. She thought to herself, that was close. This old lecher was indeed on guard. Ding Nan was shrewd and didn't show any fear on her face. Instead, she cried angrily, I didn't expect you to still be on guard against me at this time. What's the point of being your disciple? After that, she got up and was about to leave. Zheng Yuan quickly pulled her back with an apologetic smile and said softly, Good disciple, since you've been possessed by this woman, your temperament has changed greatly. It's inevitable that I have some concerns. You've done very well this time, and I'm very touched. Don't worry, I won't be suspicious of you anymore. Ding Nan's acting skills were excellent. She cried and said, You said the same thing last time, but in the end, you're still suspicious of me. Zheng Yuan hurriedly swore, If there's any falsehood in my words, may I be struck by lightning. Ding Nan wiped away her tears and asked tentatively, Really? Zheng Yuan nodded vigorously and said, Absolutely. Ping, do you still not trust Master? Only then did Ding Nan turn her anger into joy. She turned her tears into a smile and said, Pinger naturally trusts you. You showed your power today and got the immortal pen. Congratulations. But soon, Ding Nan said with a worried face, But Master, aren't you afraid of offending all the cultivation sects in the world? What if these people come to Mount Wuhua? Zheng Yuan said proudly, With the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade and the immortal pen, who in the world can be my opponent? Why should he be afraid of them? What's more, the cultivation world is in a mess now. How can they have time to make trouble for me? When I come out of seclusion for 10 days, I will definitely be invincible in the world. Ding Nan smiled and said respectfully, Then I'll congratulate Master in advance and show the power of our Yin-Yang sect. Zheng Yuan laughed heartily, while Ding Nan smiled coquettishly at the side. However, the look in her eyes kept flickering, hiding a deep chill. On the other side, after Wang Zhenyuan escaped from the small building, he immediately took a panacea and quickly rushed to the backyard. Wang Zhenyuan rushed into a room angrily and said in a low voice, Lu Yi, what's going on? Why did everything turn out like this? Didn't you say that everything was under your control? Lu Yi, the former leader of the Fox Zen school, was standing by the carved wooden window and looking at the dark sky. He smiled slightly and said confidently, "Yes, everything is under my control." Wang Jinyuan said angrily, "T. Even I was hit by the immortal fall, and the Taoist assembly has become a joke." Jing Yuan also took away the immortal pen. "How can this be under your control?" Lu Yi laughed and said, "I know all of Yan Fang's plans. She has been suspecting that I'm not dead, so she tried every means to lure me out. Last time in the Gazao sect, she attacked Li Yundong in order to lure me out. This time at the Taoist assembly, if you don't get hit by the immortal fall, how can Yan Fang believe that you are an outsider who doesn't know anything? How can you get rid of the suspicion of all the sects in the future?" Wang Jinyuan was shocked and angry. "You even schemed against me?" Lu Yi smiled slightly. "I had no choice." Wang Jinyuan was about to lose his temper, but he forcibly restrained himself. He suppressed his anger and said, "Well, even if what you said makes sense, what's the matter with the immortal pen? How can you watch Jing Yuan take the immortal pen away? Didn't you see the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade in his hand? Now that he has the immortal pen in his hand, can you imagine how powerful he will be?" Lu Yi smiled disdainfully. How powerful can a cultivator who relies on powerful magical weapons to dominate the world be? When the silver fox comes back to life, he won't be worth mentioning at all. Wang Jinyuan said angrily, T. When you resurrect the mystical silver fox, he will have killed us all and become the king. Lu Yi laughed and said, "Don't worry, Master Wan. Didn't you notice that his disciples seemed to be in harmony with him and had evil intentions?" Wang Jinyuan was stunned and said, "That's right." "How did you notice?" Lu Yi sneered and said, "There are two possibilities for Jing Yuan to let her escape. One is that he wants to drag the enemy by himself and let Ding Nan escape. The other is that he wants Ding Nan to become the target of everyone and make her a scapegoat. Given Jing Yuan's character, he would never do something that would harm himself and benefit others, so he must want to send his disciple to his death so that he can benefit from it." Wang Jinyuan said with a cold face, but his disciple didn't run away at all. Instead, she stayed very loyally. Jing Yuan was deeply moved by this. Lu Yi laughed and said disapprovingly, "Master Wan, you usually boast of being resourceful. I didn't expect that you would be so smart this time. Didn't you see that when Jing Yuan's disciple heard Jing Yuan's order to escape, she subconsciously made a movement to escape? But she soon stopped, which means that she quickly understood Jing Yuan's intention. At this time, if she was really loyal to Jing Yuan, she should have escaped immediately and led everyone away. But not only did she not, but she also said something that seemed to be loyal. Jing Yuan's disciple is very scheming. If my guess is right, Jing Yuan will definitely test his disciple again after he goes back. If he finds that his disciple has the intention of offending him while he is seriously injured, he will definitely kill her. But if his disciple can bear it, then Jing Yuan will definitely be in big trouble." Wang Jinyuan was quite moved when he heard this. He said, "Lu Yi, you are indeed an old fox. You are so meticulous and insightful. You seem to have seen everything with your own eyes. But why do you say that if Jing Yuan's disciple can bear it, then Jing Yuan will definitely be in big trouble?" Lu Yi snorted and said, "This woman is scheming." The look of enduring humiliation in her eyes is exactly the same as Yan Fang's incarnation of Mo Ashi. I have lived with Yan Fang for 9 years. How can I not see it? Jing Yuan's disciple is so tolerant, so she must have a big plan. As long as she can bear it, Jing Yuan will definitely not be on guard against her. And when a man is no longer on guard against a beautiful woman who is closest to him, that's when he will be in the most danger. Only then did Wang Jinyuan's anger turn into joy. He laughed and said, "Amazing, really amazing. I hope it's as you said. If the immortal pen and the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade fall into the hands of this woman, then I will be much more relieved." Lu Yi smiled slightly and said, "That's not necessarily true. I can see that this woman has excellent aptitude and is a good material for cultivation. If Zheng Yuan passes on his skills to her, with her forbearance, she may be much more terrifying than Zheng Yuan." Wang Zhenyuan snorted and said with a sneer, "Zheng Yuan is a smiling tiger who hides a knife in his smile. He has always been selfish. If he would do such a thing, it would be more likely to squeeze out his disciples Xinqi." Then, he said impatiently, "Let's not talk about them. Let's talk about Yan Fang. This woman always spoils our plans. What should we do?" Lu Yi smiled confidently and said, "Didn't Li Jiandong catch up with her? With his cultivation, even if Yan Fang escapes to the ends of the earth, how can she escape from his hands?" Wang Zhenyuan sighed and said, "That had better be the case. Otherwise, if this crazy woman keeps pestering us, it will be really bad." Lu Ye's eyes suddenly became very profound. He looked deeply at the dark sky and said slowly, "Don't worry, the sky is about to change." While Lu Yi and Wang Zhenyuan were talking in private, Chris, John, and Alba were listening to the Dongwu Pingtan on the yacht on the moat of Dongwu City while enjoying the beautiful night view of Dongwu City. Alba leaned against the antique bamboo railing, sighed softly, and said, "What a beautiful night view. I suffered a lot during the day and took a sightseeing boat at night. I didn't come to China in vain." John was also enjoying the bright night view of Dongwu City with great interest. He suddenly said in surprise, "Alba, do you want to go back?" Alba looked at John strangely. "Do you still want to stay here? Haven't you been humiliated enough by that Chinese man?" John's face immediately drooped and he muttered, "Maybe it's really so strict to be a disciple in China. I think I shouldn't give up like this. Zhou Qin is right. We should be able to withstand the test. Moreover, Master has such great ability. If he casually passed it on to us, it would be quite unrealistic and naive." Alba laughed. She pressed her forehead and shook her head. "You're crazy, John. You still haven't given up." As she said this, she said to Chris, "Hey, Chris, what do you think?" At this time, Chris was sitting by the window. She was turning her head to look at the beautiful scenery outside the window and the brilliant lights on both sides of the river. The cool night wind was blowing her long golden hair, making her look particularly beautiful. Many people on the cruise ship were secretly looking at her. When Chris heard Alba's words, she turned her head, sighed softly, and said, "I also think John is right. We've come all the way here. We can't give up easily. What's more, Zhou Qin is right. How can there be anything in this world that can be successful without going through tests and setbacks? I think this is a tribulation given to us by God." Alba suddenly cried out bitterly, "You two lunatics have gone crazy. Forget it, you can go crazy. I don't want to go crazy. I have to go back. Besides, have you really made up your mind to change your nationality? Also, do you have any last words that you want me to bring back to your family?" As she spoke, she suddenly saw Chris's eyes widen as she looked behind her. Alba asked curiously, "What's wrong with my back?" Chris stammered, 11 o'clock behind you. There was no one at the table just now. Why is there suddenly another person? Alba was a careless person. She didn't notice if there was someone sitting in the seat behind her. She looked back and saw a woman sitting with her back to her in the 11 o'clock direction. She smiled and said, "Maybe someone at the next table sat there." At this time, John also turned his head and said curiously, "That's not right. I remember that there were only 5 people behind us. How come there are 6 now?" Alba laughed and said, "Is it possible that not only is there someone singing for us on this yacht, but there is also someone performing magic?" But as soon as she finished speaking, her eyes suddenly bulged, and she turned her head to look behind her with an expression as if she had seen a ghost. Chris and John were also dumbfounded to find that a man had appeared in front of the woman who had suddenly appeared. And this man was none other than Li Yundong. I just entered the house. Sorry. In addition, the supergroup 1 is full. Everyone, please join the supergroup 21070904449. Vote recommendation. Previous page. Return to table of contents. Next page. Error report. If you like, please click here to add Keeping a Fox at Home to your bookshelf, so that you can read the latest chapters and updates of Keeping a Fox at Home in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Keeping a Fox at Home, please click here to express your views. Chapter 5:15. The young spirits of Yan Fang and Li Yundong were fleeing, while the other was chasing. One was fleeing like a gust of wind, and the other was chasing like a bone needle, closely following her. No matter how hard Yan Fang's young spirit tried to escape, she couldn't escape Li Yundong's pursuit. She wanted to turn into countless avatars and escape in all directions, but just as she was about to move, Li Yundong flicked the burning thumb pot with his finger. Go to the net. Yan Fang was shocked. She knew that the burning thumb pot specialized in absorbing spiritual qi. The reason why it didn't absorb her spiritual qi now was that her young spirit qi was huge and as condensed as steel, so the burning thumb pot couldn't absorb it. But if her young spirit scattered into thousands of avatars, it would be equivalent to breaking a piece of ice into countless pieces, and the burning thumb pot could easily absorb all of her young spirit avatars. Yan Fang didn't dare to split herself. She wanted to escape to the downtown area, but she was soon blocked by Li Yundong. She wanted to escape into the distance, but she couldn't escape from Li Yundong's grasp. In despair, she suddenly had an idea and got into a yacht. This time, Li Yundong didn't stop her and followed her in. Yan Fang sat in her seat, motionless. She sneered and said in a low voice, Li Yundong, do you want to fight here? As soon as Li Yundong sat down, he found that Chris, John, and Alba were staring at him with their mouths agape. He was slightly stunned, but he quickly withdrew his gaze, as if he hadn't seen them. He said, Yan Fang, you can't escape. Just surrender. Hand over Ao Wushuang and swear that you will never go against the Fox Zen school again. For Zi Yuan's sake, I will let you live. Yan Fang sneered and said, you're dreaming. Li Yundong sighed and shook his head slightly. You really don't repent. Then don't blame me for being ruthless. Yan Fang sneered and said, I'd like to see how you will do it with so many people here. Li Yundong smiled slightly. He didn't move, but his fingers pinched a magic incantation under the table. Suddenly, colorful balls exploded in the sky one after another. They were dazzling and brilliant, like thousands of flowers blooming in the east wind at night. Except for Chris and the others who happened to see Li Yundong and Yan Fang appear on the ship, the rest of the tourists on the ship didn't notice them at all. Suddenly, they saw the fireworks outside and the colorful meteors all over the sky. They immediately stood up in amazement and walked to the deck of the yacht, pointing at the sky and laughing. For a moment, the cabin of the yacht was almost empty, leaving only Li Yundong and Yan Fang looking at each other coldly, and Chris, John, and Alba staring at them with wide eyes. The little girl who was singing Pingtan on the yacht saw that the people in the cabin had suddenly run outside to watch the fireworks, and no one was listening to her Pingtan. She immediately lost interest and ended her singing hastily. Li Yundong glanced at her and saw that the little girl in a cheongsam was holding a pipa in her arms. She wanted to put on her clothes and stop singing Pingtan, so he said, Can you choose a song? Hearing this, the little girl was stunned and said, That's going to cost more. Li Yundong nodded. Sure. The little girl immediately beamed with joy and said, Sir, what do you want to hear? Li Yundong glanced at Yan Fang indifferently and said, Ambush from 10 sides. When Yan Fang saw that Li Yundong didn't take her seriously, she was so angry that her lungs almost exploded. However, she was extremely afraid of Li Yundong's strength, so she didn't dare to lose her temper, for fear that Li Yundong would suddenly explode. When the little girl heard that Li Yundong actually wanted to order ambush from 10 sides, she immediately smiled bitterly and said, "Sir, I sing pingtan." "This is not a pingtan song." "You don't know how to play?" Li Yundong asked. The little girl saw that Li Yundong was dignified and had a deep bearing between his eyebrows. He was young and handsome, and there was a sense of arrogance in his voice. Obviously, he was not an ordinary person. She didn't want Li Yundong to look down on her, so she said, "Yes, but..." Li Yundong interrupted her and said, "You want more money? Okay, I'll give it to you." The little girl said doubtfully, "Well, can you give it to me first?" Li Yundong touched his body and suddenly frowned. Only then did he remember that he was traveling with his young spirit. How could he have a penny on him? "Li Yundong, I'll pay for you." Chris, who was standing to one side, thought quickly. She immediately took out a few red notes from her pocket and handed them to the little girl, saying, "This is the money I'll pay for him." "Is it enough?" The little girl glanced at it, immediately snatched it away, and quickly hid it, as if she was afraid that Chris would regret it. She smiled brightly and thought to herself, "This young man is beautiful and has a good temperament. He even has such a beautiful foreign girl to pay for him. Alas, I really don't know what kind of background he has. If I can get such a rich husband, I won't have to worry about money for the rest of my life." The little girl's imagination ran wild, but she didn't dare to delay at all. She took out all her kung fu and began to seriously play Ambush on 10 Sides, one of the top 10 classical songs in China. Although the little girl was a little greedy, her skills were not bad. She lowered her eyes and quickly got into the mood of playing. Her 5 fingers rotated, and a string of tight and intense notes quickly jumped out of the strings. The first song of Ambush on 10 Sides, Camp, suddenly showed the tense and intense atmosphere of the first song of Ambush on 10 Sides. John and Chris, who had been watching from the side, couldn't help but become nervous along with the music. Only Alba sneered and said in a low voice, "Chris, are you crazy? How could you pay for this chauvinistic man? You're a disgrace to us feminists." Chris didn't look at her. She just whispered, "Why do I feel that there's something wrong with the two of them?" John also glared at Alba and said, "Alba, you don't want to take him as your teacher, but I do." "Shut up." Alba sneered and said, "Oh, John, I think before you change your nationality, you'd better think of a nice Chinese name for yourself first. I have a few good names to recommend to you. It just so happens that I've learned some Chinese in the past 2 days. What do you think, surname Ma and name me Flatterer?" John suddenly became furious and turned his head to quarrel with Alba, but Chris quickly kicked him under the table and said, "John, shut up." John glared at Alba fiercely and stopped looking at her angrily. Alba made a face at John and muttered in a low voice, "You're crazy. You have to change your nationality to take him as your teacher. If it were me, I would." As soon as she finished speaking, Li Yundong suddenly sighed and said to Yen Fong, "I'm sorry." After that, he turned his hand and grabbed Yen Fong. Yen Fong's face changed, and her body immediately changed from Yang spirit to Yin spirit. Her whole body seemed to pass through the chair behind her, trying to escape in an instant. But Li Yundong snorted coldly and moved like a shadow. In the blink of an eye, he appeared behind Yen Fong and slapped her head with his palm. His movements were so fast that it was as if Yen Fong had bumped into his palm. Yen Fong also saw the opportunity very quickly. Her body instantly shrank to the size of a palm. She abruptly turned and fled out of the window. Li Yundong smiled coldly. He pointed his finger at the window and saw that the window, which was made of vines, made a slight sound. Many small vines grew out and weaved a small net. The net was surrounded by blue light, like a vast net, waiting for Yen Fong to get into it. Yen Fong immediately turned her head and rushed to another window. Li Yunyang did the same thing and used the wood magic at will. Soon, small vines grew out of the windows of the ship and quickly weaved into a small net. Yen Fong had nowhere to go, so she immediately showed her original form. She gritted her teeth and rushed toward Li Yundong. Her ferocious eyes seemed to say, if you don't let me live, you won't live either. Yan Fong was fierce, and her fingers were like hooks. However, Li Yundong slightly tilted his body and dodged her grasp. He put one hand on her wrist and pulled her back to her original position with a little force. Li Yundong whispered, "Sit down." Yan Fong only felt a huge force pushing her. She couldn't help bending her knees and sitting on the chair. As soon as she sat down, the chair under her made a creaking sound and many small vines grew out, wrapping around her body one by one. Seeing that she was about to be caught, Yan Fong immediately took a deep breath and wanted to shout loudly to attract others' attention. In this way, Li Yundong would not dare to use magic so unscrupulously. Li Yundong was quick to react. He immediately slapped Yan Fong with his palm, and a majestic Jinshi pressed down on her like a huge wave. Yan Fong suddenly felt suffocated. As soon as she opened her mouth, she felt a gust of wind rushing into it. Not to mention shouting, she couldn't even breathe. She suddenly coughed twice and quickly pinched a finger gesture. Her finger touched a vine on her body, and suddenly the vine ignited by itself and broke apart with a snap. Yan Fong struggled fiercely again and immediately broke free. As soon as she broke free, she suddenly exerted her strength in an almost impossible place. Suddenly, a leg flew up from under the table and kicked toward Li Yundong's lower abdomen. This kick was insidious and hidden, without warning. With the cover of the table, it was really invisible and impossible to guard against. If it had been someone else, they would have been hit immediately. However, as soon as Li Yundong felt a gust of wind, he immediately kicked out as well. However, he knew that it was impossible for him to be faster than Yan Fong at such a close distance, so he kicked the back of her foot. The angle of his foot just blocked the momentum of Yan Fong's kick. The 2 feet collided with each other with a bang. Li Yundong immediately stepped on Yan Fong's instep and slammed it on the floor. Then he used his knee to touch the inside of her leg. As long as he did this, Yan Fong would lose her center of gravity. Li Yundong then made a heavy blow. In the case of losing her center of gravity, it was impossible for Yan Fong to dodge and fight back. After all, Yan Fong was also a master who had cultivated for many years. Her reaction was also very fast. Seeing Li Yundong come to touch her inner leg, she took advantage of the moment when he squeezed in and immediately shrank her leg, and then hit back. Under the table, the 2 of them crossed one leg and arched the other, squeezing and pressing the other. It looked very awkward, but there was a hidden killing intent in it. The 2 of them did not stop moving their hands on the table, quickly and fiercely exchanging blows. The 2 of them grabbed, hit, pinched, grabbed, and hammered. Their arms constantly collided with each other, producing dull sounds, like the beating of a drum. At this time, the little girl who was playing ambush from 10 sides had obviously entered the state of performance. Her eyes were closed and she had quickly finished the second part of ambush. She was playing the section of The Battle of Chicken Crowing Mountain. This piece of music was intense. The fingers of the player were flying up and down, so fast that they almost left afterimages. The intense music happened to become the background music of the fight between Li Yundong and Yan Fong. The atmosphere was suffocating, as if 2 armies were fighting at close quarters, swords and spears were clashing, and the atmosphere was murderous. Chris, John, and Alba were stunned and dazzled. Chris and John had seen some incredible things about Li Yundong, so they could still bear it. Alba couldn't help but mutter, "Jesus Christ. Am I watching a movie?" After I finish, I will update the second time. Don't say that I update the first time every day. Although I only updated the first time a while ago, I made up for it the next day. Chapter 5:16. Li Yundong and Yan Fong fought fiercely in the cabin. Sometimes they used magic, and sometimes they fought with their fists and feet. Every time Yan Fong wanted to alarm others in order to protect herself, Li Yundong always had a way to press her down, so that she could only fight with him obediently. Go to the net. After fighting for a while, Yan Fang also noticed that Li Yundong deliberately wanted to consume her Jinqi and spiritual energy. As long as her Jinqi was consumed to a certain extent, Li Yundong could use the burning thumb pot to absorb all her spiritual energy and Jinqi. This was killing people with a blunt knife, cutting off pieces of flesh one by one. Although the method was not fierce, the purpose was extremely vicious. The more Yan Fang fought, the colder she became. Am I going to be defeated by this guy today after being famous for 20 years? Thinking of this, Yan Fang couldn't help but feel sad, but she was unwilling to give up. She made up her mind to fight to the death. She gritted her teeth, suddenly turned her wrist, and threw a talisman at Chris, John, and Alba, who were stunned. The talisman quickly burned in the air, like a blazing fireball. In the blink of an eye, it rushed in front of Chris, burning her face red. Damn it! Seeing that Yan Fang had been crazy enough to attack ordinary people, Li Yundong was furious. His figure flashed quickly, and he appeared in front of Chris and the others like a mountain. With a wave of his hand, he took the fireball in his palm. He clapped his hands and shattered the fireball in his palm. Suddenly, countless tiny sparks appeared on his hands, like sparks. With a wave of Li Yundong's hand, these small flames immediately rushed toward Yan Fang. Yan Fang took a deep breath and blew it out. This breath of hers was really the authentic kung fu of the Xianmen sect for more than 20 years. Her aura was vigorous and condensed, like a sharp arrow, piercing through the sparks, and still going straight to Chris and the others. Crazy and the other two felt an aura rushing towards them. It was as if a knight was galloping on the battlefield, holding a long spear with red tassels fluttering in the wind. The piercing aura seemed to be piercing through their bodies. Seeing that Yan Fang had attacked the three of them one after another, Li Yunyang became even angrier. He glared at her and a burst of gang qi burst out from his body, instantly shattering Yan Fang's qi arrows. This condensed aura was like a raging tide slapping against a mountain, surging in all directions. A gust of wind blew through the cabin, causing the hair of Chris and the others to become disheveled and unable to open their eyes. At this time, the little girl playing the pipa happened to be playing the Battle of Ninely Mountain from the ambush on 10 sides. She was either stroking or lining, sometimes strumming the strings, sometimes pushing and pulling, and her fingers were flying up and down. The music was intense, and there seemed to be the sound of horse hooves, swords, and shouts in the music. The sound was sonorous and murderous. Chris, John, and Alba had never seen such a bizarre, Hollywood blockbuster fight before. The three of them had no idea how many times they had been in front of the gates of hell just now. If it hadn't been for Li Yundong, they would have died a long time ago. Chris and the others watched the intense battle that they had never seen before. Listening to the passionate and heroic ambush from 10 sides, they were really intoxicated. Their mouths were wide open and their eyes were bulging out, as if they had seen an otherworldly immortal. Yan Fang attacked Chris and the others twice in a row and finally managed to get Li Yundong away from her. She immediately shrank her body and exploded like a fireball, turning into countless cyan lights that flew in all directions. Li Yundong's eyes suddenly widened, and his figure instantly changed from Yang spirit to Yin spirit. He flew into the air and stood there. He recited the Diamond Sutra, held the burning thumb pot in his left hand, and gently flicked the middle finger of his right hand on it. Suddenly, the burning thumb pot made a ding sound, and the surrounding air was shaken into countless ripples, spreading in all directions, as if there were sound waves visible to the naked eye. Fortunately, it was still night and Li Yundong was flying high, so no one noticed it. However, Yan Fang's Yang spirit avatars, who were fleeing in all directions, suddenly heard the sound of the burning thumb pot. Their bodies suddenly froze, and then the sound waves caught up with Yan Fang's avatars. Every time they caught up with one, they were pulled back a little. Li Yundong then flicked his finger on the burning thumb pot again. With a ding, the burning thumb pot released another layer of sound waves, pulling back some of Yen Fang's avatars that were fleeing in all directions. Yen Fang was scared out of her wits. She knew that the burning thumb pot was now like a huge fishing net, enveloping all her avatars. The closer it got, the tighter it got. As long as it got closer, Li Yundong would pull the net back. At that time, even if she wanted to fight to the death, it would be impossible. Yen Fang thought quickly. She immediately let out a scream and said loudly, "Li Yundong, do you still want to save Ao Wushuang?" Li Yunyang was stunned for a moment, but it was at this moment that Yen Fang's yang spirit avatar immediately fled in all directions. Li Yundong was furious and shouted, "You still don't repent even when you're about to die. You're courting death." After that, he flicked the burning thumb pot in his hand. This sound shook all of Yen Fang's doppelgangers, causing them to tremble violently. No matter how far they escaped, they were pulled back again. Yen Fang was shocked and said again, "Li Yundong, are you crazy? If you kill me, how can you save Ao Wushuang?" Li Yundong snorted. He had been fooled once, so how could he be fooled again? Without saying a word, he flicked his finger again. Yen Fang only heard the tinkling of the burning thumb pot, which was like a soul-stirring bell, pulling her into the abyss again and again. Yen Fang was horrified and didn't dare to play any more tricks. She said sternly, "Li Yundong, do you want to save Ao Wushuang or catch me?" After that, Yen Fang immediately threw out the hidden emperor's clock. Li Yundong suddenly saw the emperor's clock being thrown by Yen Fang into the sky in an instant, drawing a purple belt of light. Yen Fang's avatars fled in all directions as if they had gone crazy. Li Yundong snorted coldly and flicked the burning thumb pot again. This time, the burning thumb pot pulled many of Yen Fang's doppelgangers to the front. As soon as these doppelgangers got within 30 feet of the burning thumb pot, they immediately turned into blue light and quickly flew into the burning thumb pot. As for Li Yundong himself, he instantly turned into a blue light and chased after the emperor's clock. Although Li Yundong's actions were different, his speed was so fast that it seemed that he had done it at the same time. Nearly half of Yen Fang's avatars were pulled over by the burning thumb pot, and then they were quickly refined by it. The yang spirit was equivalent to the second body of a cultivator. If half of the body was swallowed at once, the injury would be unimaginable for a cultivator. Yen Fang immediately let out a shrill scream. Her pain was no less than that of being dismembered, and her cultivation was greatly reduced. Yen Fang's angry roar came from afar. No one could hear what she was roaring, but her voice disappeared into the dark night, like a wild wolf that had escaped back into the deep mountains and wild forests, without a trace. Li Yundong's figure instantly returned to where he was. He held the burning thumb pot in one hand and the emperor's clock in the other. His eyes flickered as he looked in the direction where Yen Fang had gone. He deeply felt Yen Fang's resentment and anger. At the last moment, Yen Fang not only threw out the emperor's clock in an attempt to lure the tiger away from the mountain, but at the same time, she also cut off her wrist. She would rather let Li Yundong refine a large number of avatars than be caught by him. After a wild wolf was caught, in order to escape, it would even bite off its own foot. For cultivators, their power and cultivation were more important than their reputation. In order to escape, Yen Fang would rather lose half of her power. What great determination and courage did she need? I let her escape again. What a terrible opponent. After standing still in the air, Li Yundong snorted coldly to himself. Soon, his body turned into a beam of green light and flew back in the direction of Su Chan and the others. In the yacht, the little girl playing the piano had already reached the part of Xiang Wang's defeat. The rhythm was scattered and the rhythm was alternating with the close-paced sound of horses' hooves. Then she drew her 5 fingers, and the 4 strings sounded at the same time, and the music stopped abruptly. At this time, the people on the deck were still enjoying the night view, and the cabin was extremely quiet. The little girl who was playing opened her eyes, but she could no longer see Li Yundong and Yen Fang, as if they had never appeared. She couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. She looked around, but she didn't see any of them. She couldn't help but wonder, it's strange. The ship didn't stop. Where did they go? Chris and John let out a long sigh of relief, as if they had watched a thrilling Hollywood blockbuster. But they knew that the Hollywood blockbusters they had seen before were fake, but what they had seen with their own eyes was real. Chris secretly pinched her thigh hard and suddenly felt a sharp pain. She was in so much pain that she secretly grinned. Only then did she believe that everything in front of her was not a dream. Her grandmother's words suddenly echoed in her mind. If you see those cultivators one day, you must find a way to worship them as your master. Otherwise, when you are old, you will regret it like me. John opened his mouth wide, his face full of excitement and fanaticism. His expression was exaggerated, as if he wanted to shout and tell the world what he had just seen, but he didn't know how to say it. John was like a long-haired monkey scratching his ears and cheeks, dancing with joy. He said excitedly, "Chris, did you see that? I want to be an immortal, I want to be an immortal." Then he said to Alba with a face full of excitement and pride, "What do you think? Is my master powerful? Alba, I want to worship him as my master. Are you jealous?" Hardadef was proud of himself, as if the intense and covert battle just now was fought by him. Alba was stunned, as if she had been petrified. After a long time, she came to her senses. Her eyes widened as she looked at Chris and then at John. Suddenly, she spoke quickly and resolutely, "What procedures do I need to go through to change my Chinese nationality? I'll do it right away. I'm too sleepy. I'm going to sleep. I'll get up early the next morning to make up for it." Chapter 5:17. When Li Yundong returned to the small building, he found that the cultivators of various sects had already left, such as the Qingqing sect, the Qingwei sect, and the Jinshan sect. In particular, most of the cultivators of some small cultivation sects had left. Only the big sects, such as the Zhengyi school, the Chuanzhen dragon sect, and the Gazao sect, still had some people left. Go to the internet. At this time, Ziyuan and the others had also recovered from the immortal fall. Seeing Li Yundong return, Su Chan, Ziyuan, Zhou Qin, as well as Chao Yi and the little foxes, who were taking care of Lu Yuehong, immediately stood up to greet him. Su Chan and the little foxes looked at Li Yundong with wide eyes and asked with concern, "Did you catch her?" Li Yundong shook his head, and the little foxes suddenly sighed. Chao Yi gritted her teeth and said, "I can't believe we let this guy run away again." Ziyuan looked worried. Second Sherbua is stubborn and can endure. If she runs away, I really don't know when she will appear again. Li Yundong also sighed and said, at the last moment, Yan Fong would rather lose half of her strength and run away. Although she is an enemy, I still admire her very much. When Lu Yuehong, who was seriously injured, heard that Yan Fong had lost half of her strength, she couldn't help but be happy and said, "Leader, since Yan Fong has been seriously injured, I think she won't make things difficult for us in a short time." "Is that so?" As she spoke hurriedly, her injuries were immediately affected, and she coughed violently again. Chao Yi couldn't help complaining to her, "Shiji, you can only be a thief for 1,000 days. How can you guard against thieves for 1,000 days? Just rest and recuperate." Lu Yuehong forced a smile and said, "Shiji, I just want to take advantage of this period of time to search for Yan Fong's whereabouts once and for all." Hearing Lu Yuehong call Chao Yi Shiji, Li Yundong couldn't help asking, "Sherbua Lu Yuehong, Sherbua Chao Yi is only ranked 6th, not the youngest. Below her are Yi Yu and Ao Wushuang. In principle, Ao Wushuang is the youngest, so she should be called Shiji. Why do you call Sherbua Chao Yi Shiji?" Lu Yuehong sighed and said bitterly, "Leader, Yi Yu is dead and Ao Wushuang is also in danger. Now in our Fox Zen school, Chao Yi is the youngest. If I don't call her junior sister, who else should I call?" Li Yundong smiled slightly and said to Chao Yi Sherbua, "I'm afraid you won't be able to be the little shimmy. His words stunned everyone in the Fox Zen school. Su Chan was the most quick-witted. She suddenly looked ecstatic, grabbed Li Yundong with both hands, and said loudly, "Yundong, did you save my master?" Li Yundong patted her soft hand with a smile and nodded. "Not bad." Everyone in the Fox Zen school was overjoyed and cheered loudly. Lu Yuehong couldn't help but be overjoyed. Junior sister has been rescued? Where? Where is she? Chao Yi was also pleasantly surprised and couldn't help chanting the name of Buddha. Amitabha, thank God. Little Shimmy has finally been rescued. Finally, our Fox Zen school doesn't need to be supported by our leader alone. This is a joyous occasion. The little foxes rolled their eyes and looked at Li Yundong up and down, as if they wanted to see where he would take Ao Wushuang out in the next second. Li Yundong flipped his wrist and took out the fist-sized emperor's clock from his arms. He said, "Ao Wushuang is inside. When we go back, we can save her." Everyone saw that the emperor's clock was purple all over, and there was a hint of gold in the purple. There were all kinds of runes and figures engraved on it. Su Chan's eyes were sharp. She saw that there was a woman whose appearance and figure were very similar to Ao Wushuang. She pointed at the image and said, "This is my master." Li Yundong looked at it and said with a smile, "I'm afraid so." "Don't worry. You'll see your master when you go back." Su Chan looked up at Li Yundong, her eyes full of admiration and emotion. This boy had promised to save her master, and now he had done it. Chao Yi couldn't help urging, "Leader, let's go back first, shall we?" However, Li Yundong waved his hand and said, "There's no hurry. Let me say hello to the cultivators of the other sections." After that, he walked up to Du Fei of the Chuanjin Dragon sect, cupped his hands, and said, "Jinren Du, I really didn't expect the Taoist assembly to turn out like this. Thank you for speaking up for justice at the Taoist assembly. If you need any help in the future, just let me know." Du Fei also cupped one hand in the other before his chest and said with a smile, "Jinrenli, although this Taoist assembly has turned into a farce and the immortal pen has been taken away by Zheng Yuan, you have shown great power and defeated the masters of various sections. Later, you turned the tide and drove the masters of Legoino out of the assembly. This kind of prestige will remain in the world forever. In the future, it will definitely be a popular story." Li Yundong smiled noncommittally and said, "It's just an empty reputation. It's not worth mentioning." Jinren Du. He looked at Yu Sheng and Wei Qing again, cupped his hands and said, "Jinren Yu, Jinren Wei, goodbye." At this time, Yu Sheng had completely lost his temper with Li Yundong. He was convinced and cupped his hands to Li Yundong, saying, "After this battle, there is no longer any objection to your reputation as the best in the world. I, Yu Sheng, am convinced." However, Yu Sheng quickly changed his tone and said, "But Jinrenli, there are countless cultivation masters in the world. Each sect has a senior master who has cultivated in seclusion. I'm afraid it will be difficult for you to call yourself the best in the world." Li Yundong laughed and said, "I just hope that others won't make trouble for me. I don't care if I'm first or not." Yu Sheng admired him even more. "Jinrenli, you are so open-minded. I admire you." Wei Qing's eyes widened. She quickly took out a notebook and a pen from her arms and handed them to Li Yundong, saying, "Super Li, can I have your autograph?" Li Yundong asked curiously, "What did you call me?" Wei Qing had always been afraid of the world being in chaos, so she would never stop talking without shocking people. She giggled and said, "I called you Super Li. Originally, I wanted to call you Jinren Li. As the saying goes, Jinren Zhang was 500 years ago, and Jinren Li will be 500 years later. In the past, Jinren had to be conferred the title by the emperor, but now there is no emperor. Everyone calls themselves Jinren, so it's not cool to call you Jinren Li. So I'll just call you Super Li." Anyway, 500 years ago, Zhang Sanfeng was also known as invincible. 500 years ago, Zhang Sanfeng was Super Li, and 500 years later. Wei Qing was beaming with joy and said proudly, haha, in the future, if anyone asks who gave me the title of Super Li, they might mention my name. Super Li, I'm also famous like you, haha. Super Li. Hurry up and sign. Hee hee. Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Du Fei, who was beside him, also tried hard to hold back his laughter. He glared at her and shouted, nonsense, don't you know that people will die from flattery? Wei Qing made a face at him and said, what do you mean by flattery? No one in this Taoist assembly can beat Tachibana Wakako, but Li Yundong scared her to tears with one palm. If this is not invincible, then what is? Yuxing said seriously, it's not necessarily invincible in the world. At least Master is not necessarily weaker than Jinrenli. Wei Qing rolled her eyes at him and said, how old is Master? How old is Jinrenli? If Li Yundong is not invincible in the world after a few more years of cultivation, you can dig out my eyes. Yuxing thought for a moment and nodded. That's true. Wei Qing giggled again and handed the autograph book and pen to Li Yundong. She said with a smile, Super Li, sign it, sign it. Li Yundong took it, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. He opened it and saw his signature from last time. He smiled and said, didn't you sign it last time? Why did you sign it again? Wei Qing smiled and said, last time was last time, this time is this time. Li Yundong signed helplessly and said as he signed, why did you bring this to the Taoist assembly? Yu Sheng, who was standing to one side, tried hard to hold back his laughter and said, she said that she wanted to collect the signatures of famous cultivators in the world and sell them in the future. Wei Qing immediately stepped on his foot and glared at him fiercely. You talk too much. As she said this, she turned to look at Li Yundong with a smile on her face. Super Li, you won't refuse me, will you? Shixiang is very stingy. Although he has money, he won't share it with me, so I have to make my own income. Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. Gossip Wei is really a good idea. How creative. Wei Qing asked curiously, what Gossip Wei? Li Yundong also pretended to look at Wei Qing strangely. Isn't your surname Wei? Wei Qing quickly reacted. She smiled and said angrily, you're the gossip. Li Yundong, Du Fei, and Yuxing laughed at the same time. Not far away, Zhongling, Zhou Ping, and the others of the Jingyi school saw Li Yundong and Du Fei of the Chuanjin dragon sect talking happily. Zhou Ping couldn't help but sneer and say, humph, they really colluded together. The Chuanjin sect is really determined to go against us. I think they don't want to be the leader of the Six Sects Alliance anymore. And Super Li? Bah! I feel sick listening to this flattery. As she said this, Zhou Ping couldn't help but take a step forward and want to mock them loudly. However, Zhang Ling immediately grabbed her with one hand, shook her head at her, and said in a low voice, Li Yundong is in the limelight now. Let's not have a conflict with him first. What's more, he turned the tide and drove away the masters of Regoino. All the sects owe him a great favor. Zhou Ping said anxiously, but didn't Yan Fang say that he has a big conspiracy to resurrect the mystical silver fox? Zhang Ling looked at Li Yundong with a sullen face and said, the whole thing is just Yan Fang's empty words. Now Li Yundong is back, but Yan Fang is nowhere to be seen. It's very likely that she has hidden or been caught. Zhou Ping couldn't help but say, that's just right. Yan Fang is also a member of our Jingyi school. We can take this opportunity to intervene and make him lose his prestige. Zhang Ling glared at Zhou Ping and sneered. Make him? If he insists that Yan Fang is not with him, what will you do? Force him? Can you beat him? Humph. Li Yundong has become so strong that you and I can no longer deal with him. If we go to find trouble with him now, we will be asking for humiliation. Zhou Ping gritted her teeth and said, then what should we do? Do we watch him, a junior, step on the head of our Jingyi school? Humph, He is so young and already calls himself invincible Li. If he is allowed to cultivate for another 2 years, I'm afraid that the leader of our Juni school will have to salute him when he sees him. Bah, I don't admit that he is invincible Li. Zhang Ling sneered and said, humph, invincible, invincible. What a good invincible Li. Zhou Ping, you are wrong. We just have to admit that he is invincible Li. Not only do we admit it, but we also have to publicize it and let the whole world know the prestige of Li Yundong. Zhou Ping was shocked and said, why? Master, aren't you boosting the morale of others and destroying your own prestige? Zhang Ling sneered and said, there are many cultivation sects in the world. How can they be willing to let Li Yundong suppress them? What's more, although Yan Fang's words have no evidence, the most terrible thing in the world is groundless rumors. I believe that it won't be long before the Fox Zen School becomes the target of public criticism, and Li Yundong will definitely become the most suspicious person. As for the title of Invincible Li, I'm afraid that it will arouse the suspicion of the cultivators of all sects. Zhou Ping's eyes lit up and she said to Zhang Ling, Master, you are the best. What a good plan. Zhang Ling waved her sleeves and shouted in a low voice, Li Yundong is also a rare talent. He is not inferior to Wang Yuanshan back then, but it's a pity that he is always against our Zhuni school. Hurry up and take Zhang Tianhe and Wang Lingfei back. Don't waste any more time here. Zhou Ping nodded in agreement and picked up the unconscious Zhang Tianhe. Then, she asked her younger sister, who was not far away, to pick up Wang Lingfei. Zhang Ling smiled and said to Li Yundong, Invincible Li, goodbye. Thank you for taking care of the Taoist assembly this time. Zhuni school will remember it. After that, she quickly turned into a green light and left with the disciples of the Zhuni school. Everyone in the Fox Zen school suddenly laughed and said to Li Yundong, Congratulations, leader. Zhuni school also recognizes leader's invincible name. This is really a happy event for our Fox Zen school. Li Yundong didn't comment. His face was neither surprised nor happy. He looked in the direction in which Zhang Ling and the others had left, and his eyes flickered. After a long time, he said, Let's go back. It's time to rescue Ao Wushuang, who has been trapped for a long time. Yesterday's second night watch, today's 2-night watch as usual. Chapter 518. When Li Yundong and the others returned home, the little foxes couldn't help cheering as soon as they entered the house. They went to see the net. 7 K.O.M. We're finally back. Su Chan sighed with emotion and looked around at the familiar environment. She felt that the Taoist assembly had only lasted for a day, but it felt as long as a century for them. Li Yundong handed Zhou Qin, who was on his back, to Erwan Hongling and told her to help Zhou Qin apply medicine. Then he began to prepare to rescue Ao Wushuang. This time, the Taoist assembly had been full of twists and turns. Although it was dangerous and tortuous, Li Yundong had turned the tide with his extraordinary cultivation and strength. In the end, Chao Yi had returned and Yan Fang had been dragged out of the Fox Zen school. Although she had escaped in the end, her cultivation had declined by half and it would be difficult for her to pose a threat in a short time. Most importantly, Li Yundong had saved Ao Wushuang, which was undoubtedly exciting news for the Fox Zen school. Whether it was Su Chan or the little foxes, when they saw Li Yundong fighting against the heroes at the Taoist assembly, they all wanted to help him, but their cultivation quotients were too low. Not only could they not help, but they would also become a burden. In fact, except for Li Yundong, there was no one in the Fox Zen school who could fight. This was really a joke. However, Ao Wushuang had become famous early, and she was extremely strong in fighting methods. She used to be known as the top master of the Fox Zen school. Once she escaped, the strength of the Fox Zen school would improve. Li Yundong took out the Lyoha sword and was ready to cut the emperor's clock. But just as he was about to make a move, he saw Zi Yuan frowning thoughtfully. He couldn't help but stop and ask, Ziyuan, what's wrong? Is there something wrong? Ziyuan, who was standing to one side, frowned. She opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something, but she swallowed it. Seeing her hesitation, Li Yundong smiled and said, if you have something to say, just say it. Is there anything else we need to say? Ziyuan smiled slightly and said, actually, it's nothing. I'm thinking about what Shibui Yanfang said. Li Yundong was stunned for a moment, but soon he laughed again. He said, are you worried that we will want to resurrect the mystical silver fox? She quickly looked at Su Chan, Chao Yi, and the others of the Fox Zen school and said, I believe that you are not such a person, but... Su Chan was clever and immediately said, Sister Ziyuan, as long as I'm with Yundong, I'll be very happy. I'll do whatever he does, and I won't do anything he doesn't want me to do. As she spoke, she took Li Yundong's hand with a smile and said coquettishly, isn't that right, leader? Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. With a straight face, he pretended to be angry and said, I told you not to cause trouble. Have you been obedient? Su Chan's face fell. She lowered her head and rubbed the hem of her shirt with her fingers. I didn't do it on purpose, she muttered. Chao Yi, who was standing to one side, also said seriously, Jinren Ziyuan, please don't worry. The mystical silver fox has been dead for more than 1,200 years. Let alone whether you want to resurrect her or not, even if you want to, where can you find her soul? Besides, the times have changed. What can we do after the resurrection of the mystical silver fox? Our Fox Zen school has been excluded for thousands of years. Now that Li Yundong has been the leader, it's time for us to turn over a new leaf and rebuild the reputation of the sect. How can we do such a heinous thing? Ziyuan smiled gently and said, then I'm worrying too much. Seeing that Ziyuan was no longer entangled in this matter, Su Chan didn't want the two sides to have a conflict because of the mystical silver fox and separate from this life. She said to Li Yundong, hurry up and save my master. I miss her so much. When Chao Yi of the Fox Zen school saw that Ziyuan didn't pursue the matter any further, she was relieved and focused on Li Yundong. Only Wan Hongling, who was standing to one side, knew her Shiji the best. If Ziyuan had a doubt in her heart, she would never give up until she figured it out. Moreover, it was impossible for Chao Yi's words to dispel her doubts. Wan Hongling quietly reached out to pull the corner of Ziyuan's clothes and winked at her. Ziyuan glanced at her and shook her head slightly, indicating that she should not speak. If there was something to say, they could talk about it when they got back. Wan Hongling understood, nodded, and looked at Li Yundong. Li Yundong threw the emperor's clock in front of him, and then controlled the Ryoha sword to instantly chop at the emperor's clock. Dang! The glass sky emperor coiling bell trembled violently, then it emitted bursts of purple light. Faint figures appeared on the glass sky emperor coiling bell one after another. Su Chan's eyes were sharp. She pointed to one of them and said in surprise, that's my master. The little foxes also chirped one after another, oh, I see youngest martial uncle. Thank God. I hope she's fine. But if this is Shishu, who are the others? The little foxes were suddenly stunned and looked at each other. Ziyuan also suddenly frowned and said quickly, Li Yundong, stop. But it was too late. The Ryoha sword slashed down again. With a clang, the emperor's clock shook violently. With a crack appeared at the top. In an instant, an intense and dazzling seven-colored light burst out from within. Then, beams of green light flew out from within, like countless meteors flying in all directions. In an instant, there seemed to be a typhoon in the living room, and the tea table in the living room was almost blown away. Su Chan and the others were dumbfounded. They were all blown away by the wind. Li Yundong's Jinqi was powerful. In the eyes of others, the hurricane was so powerful that they couldn't open their eyes, but in his eyes, it was just a breeze. He also widened his eyes and thought to himself, oh no. The others sealed in the glass sky emperor clock had also been released. Damn it, I was thinking about Ao Wushuang getting out of trouble. Why didn't I think of this? In an instant, Li Yundong took out the burning thumb pot in his hand and was about to use it to catch the people who had escaped. But just as he was about to move his finger, he suddenly remembered that if he had also sucked Ao Wushuang into the burning thumb pot, what would he do? The burning thumb pot was not like the emperor's clock. It was a powerful magical weapon of sealing, and it specialized in restraining Ao Wushuang's demons and ghosts. It was a big furnace. If someone was caught in it, they would be directly refined. There would be no residue left, and they wouldn't even have a chance to reincarnate. As Li Yundong hesitated, the scattered light of the emperor's clock disappeared in an instant. After a while, the purple halo of the emperor's clock disappeared little by little, and it fell to the ground with a clang. Li Yundong smiled bitterly in his heart. This is good. The personal magical weapon of Yi Fashion, a great cultivator in the period of Emperor Xuanzong of Tang, has been destroyed. Moreover, who knows what kind of divine being is sealed in this powerful magical weapon? Zi Yuan couldn't help but widen her eyes. She subconsciously wanted to ask Li Yundong to use the burning thumb pot, but when she saw Li Yundong take out the burning thumb pot and was about to flick it, he couldn't help but stop moving. Zi Yuan thought for a moment and immediately knew Li Yundong's scruples. She couldn't help stamping her feet secretly and saying, "Damn it, I didn't expect to release so many sealed cultivators after Ao Wushuang. I don't know how many good people and how many bad people are among them." Soon, Su Chan, Wan Hongling, and the others also understood the key. For a moment, the living room was silent. They all looked at Li Yundong with their mouths agape, not knowing what to do. The little foxes looked at each other, and the joy of Ao Wushuang's escape instantly disappeared. Su Chan's eyes were wide open, but she couldn't help but burst into laughter. Li Yundong glared at her and said, "What are you laughing at?" Su Chan giggled and said, "Yundong, it turns out that you can also cause trouble. I thought I was the only one who could." After that, the little foxes also giggled. Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He shook his head helplessly and said, "This is really a mistake. I didn't expect such a situation to happen." Zi Yuan also smiled bitterly and said, "Even a wise man will make a mistake. This is also something that can't be helped. But where's Ao Wushuang? Why don't I see her?" Everyone immediately began to search around, but when they were looking around, they heard a faint sigh next to them. A beautiful woman wearing a crimson palace-made dress appeared in front of them. Su Chan's eyes widened, and a look of ecstasy appeared on her face. She stared at the woman in a daze for a while, and suddenly burst into tears. She threw herself into the woman's arms and shouted, "Master!" Li Yundong saw Ao Wushuang standing there gracefully. Her black hair was like a dark cloud falling down. Although she had been sealed for a long time, once she was released, she was still as beautiful as ever. There was a cold and arrogant temperament all over her body. Ao Wushuang hugged Su Chan tenderly and stroked her hair with one hand. She quickly looked around. When she saw that she was in a modern house and that all the members of the Fox Zen school were here, she couldn't help but be stunned. But soon she saw that Zi Yuan and Wan Hongling were also next to her, and they seemed to get along well with everyone. She couldn't help but show a look of surprise on her face. But when Ao Wushuang's gaze fell on Li Yunyang, her eyes suddenly lit up. She was so surprised that she opened her mouth wide and couldn't help pushing Su Chan away from her arms. She widened her eyes, took 2 steps forward, and said tentatively, You are. Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "Senior Ao Wushuang, we meet again." At this moment, Ao Wushuang almost thought that the young man in front of her, who was in his prime, was tall, and at the same time exuded an elegant and calm master temperament, was Wang Yuanshan. But when she heard Li Yundong's voice, she suddenly came to her senses. She took a deep breath and looked Li Yundong up and down. She said in surprise, "I haven't seen you for a few months. Your cultivation has actually improved so much." Isn't this too exaggerated? Chapter 519. Li Yundong smiled but didn't say anything. He remembered that when he had been taught a lesson by Ao Wushuang in the past, he hadn't been able to fight back at all. But now, with the burning thumb pot in his hand, he could completely defeat Ao Wushuang. What's more, he also had the Dharmakaya of Wisdom King, which was the nemesis of all demons and gods in the world. Go to the internet. 7 KOM. Ao Wushuang looked Li Yundong up and down, and her eyes were shining. She nodded to herself and couldn't help saying, "Yes, it's as I expected. Choner, you found a good partner." Su Chan held Li Yundong's arm with both hands, her face full of pride. She raised her little face high and said with a smile, "Of course." Li Yundong said with a smile, "Senior Ao Wushuang, how are you in the Emperor's clock? I heard from Choner that you were injured before you were sealed. Are you okay?" Ao Wushuang smiled and said, "If first Shiji hadn't sealed me with the Emperor's clock, I would probably have died. My soul would have been sucked clean by the threaded hairpin of soul traversal. But she used the glass sky Emperor's clock to seal me, which saved my life. Don't worry, if the threaded hairpin of soul traversal doesn't suck souls, this injury is nothing at all." At this time, Su Chan hurriedly said to Ao Wushuang as if she was showing off a treasure, "Master, I have a lot of things to tell you. First, the one who attacked you was not great-uncle Mo Ashi, but Yen Fong. Second, Yundong is now the leader of our Fox Zen school. Third, Yundong has seriously injured Yen Fong's yang spirit. Now her cultivation has been reduced by half, so she is no longer a threat to us." No matter which of these three things, Yen Fong was extremely surprised. She looked at Li Yundong and said with a slight smile, "It seems that this will be a very long story." Li Yundong also smiled and said, "I'm going to make dinner. Let's talk while we eat." When the little foxes heard this, they immediately cheered. "The leader is going to cook. Hooray! There will be delicious food." Ao Wushuang saw that the little foxes of the Fox Zen school were all very supportive of Li Yundong, and their intimate expressions were from the bottom of their hearts. Obviously, they liked this leader very much. Especially when they heard that he was going to cook, they were even more surprised than when they saw her escape. She couldn't help but be more curious and muttered to herself, "What kind of magic does Li Yundong have?" Su Chan rolled her eyes, as if she knew what her master was thinking. She said with a smile, "Master, do you want to know why Yundong is so popular?" Ao Wushuang pretended to be angry and glared at her. "You are so clever that you know everything. Tell me." Su Chan moved closer to Ao Wushuang's ear mysteriously and whispered, "Because the food he cooks is very delicious, and the food you cook is terrible." "No, that's not right, you don't even know how to cook. You only know how to buy hard and cold flatbread for me." After saying that, the little girl giggled and ran away. Ao Wushuang immediately frowned and said, "Evil disciple, say it again. I've just got out of trouble, and you want to fight with me?" Su Chan laughed, hid behind Li Yundong, and made a face at Ao Wushuang. Ao Wushuang was so angry that she laughed. Chao Yi and the injured Lu Yuehong also came over and took Ao Wushuang's hand. They couldn't help laughing and said, "Little Shimmy, you finally got out of trouble. We were so worried." Ao Wushuang's face was cold but her heart was warm. She couldn't help but feel warm in her heart. She also took Chao Yi and Lu Yuehong's hands and said with a smile, "Shiji, why are there only the two of you? Where are the others? Where is Shibua?" It would have been better if she hadn't said it, but Lu Yuehong immediately burst into tears. She choked and said, "Eldest Shiji Ao Wushuang, second Shiji Gu Feng, third Shiji Zhuang Yiting, fifth Shiji Zhang Sun Hong, and seventh Shiji Yi Yu, they have all passed away." Ao Wushuang was shocked. "Ah. They are all dead? Then, what about Shibua? How is he? He is very powerful. He shouldn't have. Lu Yuehong cried. Our leader was attacked by Yan Fang and then besieged by cultivators of various sections. In the end, he also passed away. Ao Wushuang felt as if she had been struck by lightning. Her body trembled violently, and she stood there for a long time without saying anything. Chao Yi sighed and said to Ao Wushuang, if Li Yundong hadn't arrived at that time, I'm afraid that our Fox Zen school would have been in trouble. Seeing that they were talking gloomily, Li Yundong said, don't mention the past. Let's talk about something happy. What do you want to eat tonight? If you want to say something, say it quickly. Su Chan also smiled and said, Yundong, whatever you cook is delicious. We'll eat whatever you cook. The little foxes also said, yes, leader, hurry up and make something to eat. The Taoist assembly has been going on for a whole day, but we haven't eaten anything except tea. We're so hungry that our chests are sticking to our backs. Li Yundong smiled and said, I'll know what to cook if you guys order. Lu Yuehong also smiled through her tears and said, leader, you can do whatever you want. Li Yundong rolled up his sleeves and said loudly, well, I'll make the 4 famous dishes of the Fox Zen school today. When everyone heard this, they immediately exclaimed in unison, no. Li Yundong laughed and said, aren't you supposed to eat whatever I cook? Su Chan scolded him with a smile, you're so annoying. This doesn't count. Ao Wushuang asked curiously, the Taoist assembly has been held? What are the 4 famous dishes of the Fox Zen school? Why don't we know about them? Su Chan pulled Ao Wushuang to the side with a smile and said, Master, listen to me slowly. As she spoke, she began to talk about how she had seen Ao Wushuang being sealed by Yan Fang, how she had escaped down the mountain, and how Li Yundong had fought against the major sects on Mount Tianlong. She spoke eloquently along the way, and there were many exaggerated and beautiful words in it. Li Yundong, with his cultivation quotient, blushed a little and immediately went into the kitchen. Seeing that the Fox Zen school was full of joy, Wan Hongling couldn't help turning her head to look at Zi Yuan. She saw that Zi Yuan was still lowering her head, frowning and looking worried, as if she was worried about something. Wan Hongling whispered, Shiji Zi Yuan, what are you thinking about? Zi Yuan said in a deep voice, I'm thinking. Who exactly is locked up in the Emperor's clock? Wan Hongling smiled and said, why don't we ask Ao Wushuang later? Zi Yuan nodded. She had a faint bad feeling in her heart, but at the moment, the atmosphere of the Fox Zen school was rarely happy and lively, so she didn't say it out loud and spoil the mood. After Li Yundong prepared a table full of food, a group of people sat down at the table. Even Zhou Qin was helped up by Li Yundong and sent to the table. Li Yundong was elected to sit at the head of the table. Zi Yuan sat in the first seat on the left, followed by Wan Hongling, Zhou Qin, and the little foxes. On the other side were Ao Wushuang, Chao Yi, Lu Yuehong, Su Chan, Ling Yu, and the others. Li Yundong saw that everyone was gathered together. The Fox Zen school hadn't been so lively for a long time. He couldn't help laughing and saying, although I didn't get the immortal pen in the Taoist assembly, in my opinion, I found Senior Ao Wushuang again. This is far better than getting 10 good powerful magical weapons. Everyone agreed in unison. For a moment, the table was full of laughter and laughter. From Ao Wushuang to Zi Yuan, from Su Chan to the little foxes, all of them were stunning beauties. This table was really full of blooming flowers, and all the beauties were competing for beauty. When the meal was getting lively, Ao Wushuang saw that Zi Yuan, who was sitting opposite her, was frowning, as if she was thinking about something. She couldn't help but ask with a smile, Zi Yuan, what are you thinking about? Ao Wushuang had heard from Su Chan what had happened these days. She also knew that if it hadn't been for Zi Yuan, the Fox Zen school would have been razed to the ground. In addition, Zi Yuan was one of the closest people to Wang Yuanshan, so she had a much better impression of Zi Yuan. Zi Yuan smiled slightly and said, Senior Ao Wushuang, I have a question to ask you. Ao Wushuang smiled and said, "Go ahead." Ziyuan asked, "Senior, do you know who else is locked up in the Emperor's clock?" Ao Wushuang was stunned for a moment and couldn't help frowning. What's wrong? Was there anyone else who was released? Seeing that this matter had already been revealed, Li Yundong couldn't help coughing, saying with a wry smile, "It's my fault. If I hadn't been reckless, I wouldn't have let anyone else out." Ao Wushuang glanced at Li Yundong. She knew that Li Yundong was taking care of her own face. The Emperor's clock was Yi Fashion's powerful magical weapon, and Yi Fashion was one of the great cultivators of the Tianbao period. How could his powerful magical weapon be a joke? If he didn't split it open, how could he release the people sealed inside? But once it was split open, the sealed people would naturally run out. Ao Wushuang thought to herself, "Chana really has good taste. Li Yundong's cultivation is so high now, but he can still put down his pride and cook for her. He's so considerate and meticulous when he talks. Not bad, not bad." Ao Wushuang said seriously, "Leader, you don't have to excuse me. All of this happened because of me. If I hadn't believed Chana, I wouldn't have been attacked by Yan Fang, and these things wouldn't have happened. Leader, don't worry. I will take responsibility for the whole thing." Seeing that Ao Wushuang was blaming herself, Su Chan immediately said anxiously, "No, I didn't make it clear. Master, I don't blame you." Ao Wushuang touched Su Chan's head with a smile and said, "It's none of your business, fool." Zhou Qin, who had been silent all this time, suddenly smiled and said, "But I don't think so. If Senior Ao Wushuang hadn't been caught, Li Yundong wouldn't have gone to Mount Tianlong, and everything that happened later wouldn't have happened. How could there be Super Li today?" Everyone laughed when they heard this, and Ziyuan also smiled. This is the cycle of cause and effect. Ao Wushuang smiled and went back to the topic. She said, "When I was sealed by Yan Fang, my 6 senses were almost completely sealed. I felt as if I had been poured with cement. When I came through, I was already here, so." She smiled and said to Ziyuan, "I really don't know who is locked up in the Emperor's clock." Seeing Ziyuan's worried face, Li Yundong couldn't help saying, "Ziyuan, don't think too much. Even if some demons and ghosts are released, I'll go and catch them again." Ziyuan bit her lip and looked like she wanted to say something but hesitated. Seeing this, Ao Wushuang said, "Ziyuan, if you have anything to say, you can say it directly." Ziyuan thought for a moment. She glanced at Li Yundong and said softly, "The catastrophe that Yan Fang mentioned. Could it have something to do with this?" This sentence stunned everyone at the table. For a moment, the dining room was quiet, and no one spoke. Li Yundong's heart also skipped a beat. He thought to himself, if the so-called catastrophe of the cultivation world is because I released the cultivators who don't know good and evil sealed in the Emperor's clock, then, it would be too tragic. You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.